Hardly had the manager's voice faded away when Jared kicked him hard in the leg. "What the fuck? How dare you ask her to kneel down and apologize to that man? Don't you know who she is?" Ignoring the manager's sour face, he walked up to Carlos and was going to ask him to help Debbie. But on second thought, he changed his mind and deemed it wise not to interfere in the couple's private affairs. So without uttering a word, he turned around and walked back to Debbie. Everyone was dumbfounded, not knowing what he was doing. The manager had no idea who Debbie was, but as an experienced, business-minded person, he knew his priorities. His boss and two other distinguished guests were blocked by the crowd, so he urged them to make way. "Gentlemen, please get out of the way." He decided to settle matters with them after Carlos and his friends left the club. "Son of a bitch, how dare you kick me? I swear I'll break your leg," he angrily swore to himself. The moment Damon saw his brother, he instantly realized what was wrong with his VIP card. His eyebrows raised a little when he recognized the girl next to Jared. Excitement ruled over him as he was dying to witness the fun that was about to begin. He elbowed Wesley and said in a light voice so that Carlos wouldn't hear him, "Look, the girl who smashed the private booth is Carlos' wife." Wesley rolled his eyes at him, then followed the direction where he was pointing. He stepped aside to keep Damon at arm's length. Damon's face soured at Wesley's reaction. "What is wrong with this guy? Why is he avoiding me as if I had some communicable disease? Good evening, Mr. Hua, Mr. Han, and Mr. Lee. Nice to meet you guys. I didn't expect to meet you here. Are you enjoying the party?" Laying his eyes upon Carlos and his friends, Oscar suppressed his anger and walked towards them with a forced, flattering smile. Damon flashed a wicked grin. He knew this man was finished, for he had offended Carlos' wife. Wesley, as a military officer, abhorred evils as deadly foes and knew one when he saw one. He didn't even turn his head to cast the man a single glance. He only wished he could shoot him straight in the head right this instant. "Come over here," Carlos motioned, but not to Oscar. The onlookers got confused and wondered whom he was talking to. Debbie, on the other hand, knew that Carlos was talking to her. At that moment, she was no longer the same girl who had smashed the private booth a moment ago. Uneasily, she gripped her shirt and wondered whether she should listen to him or not. After a series of pondering, she finally decided to be an obedient wife to her husband. In disbelief, they watched the girl jog along towards Carlos. Looking at the girl standing before him, Carlos curled his lips in satisfaction and asked in a cool voice, "What happened?" Although she looked rather obedient right now, he could feel the anger brewing inside her. He knew his wife was not a bully, and there must be a reason behind all this trouble. Hearing his question, the group who had offended Debbie were quite nervous. The girls who had spoken ill of her, the manager who had asked her to kneel down, and Oscar who had attempted to slap her. Why is Mr. Hua so nice to her? How are they related? They mused. Debbie knew Carlos was never a kind-hearted man. If she told him the truth, he would definitely deal with these people in the harshest means possible. He might even throw them into the ocean or bury them alive. She didn't want to bully others with Carlos' resources, so she decided to smooth things over and pretend that nothing had happened. "Nothing happened. I smashed the private booth. I'm going to pay for it," she said indifferently. Since she refused to tell him the truth, Carlos turned to Tristan and ordered, "Tristan, make my wife the lawful owner of this club." After a short pause, he added, "Contact the lawyer now." Everyone was held speechless by what Carlos had said. His words went down like a bomb. The hallway went so still that you could even hear a pin as it dropped. Debbie was flabbergasted as well. She looked at Carlos with her jaws slack. Soon, Damon came back to his senses and turned to Wesley. "Hey bro, be ready to give me your pistol." Tristan swallowed hard, and without asking, he took his phone out and dialed the lawyer's number. When the call was answered on the other end, he said, "Mr. Fu, Mr. Hua would like you to help him make his wife, Debbie Nian, the lawful owner of Orchid Private Club." As for her personal data, I'll send everything you need via email. Please do it as soon as possible. No. Please don't do it. After a long time, Debbie finally managed to say something. She grabbed Carlos' arm and stuttered, Mr. Hua, boss, please don't make such silly jokes. It's not funny at all. Carlos looked at his wife and then turned to the manager. The rest is up to you. If you fail to deal with it properly, you'll be sorry for the rest of your life. Kneel down and apologize to her.
Yes.
Mr. Hua, Miss Nien. The manager almost pissed in his pants as his knees touched the floor. With what Carlos had ordered, Debbie was raised from being a student to being the boss of a high-end club. Needless to say, the share-out bonus of which was up to hundreds of millions a year. Carlos Hua, listen to me, Debbie demanded in a stern voice. But before she could make him turn, Carlos grabbed her hand and led her to the exit of the club. Upon seeing this, the girls inside the club were awed with mixed emotions. Envious, jealous, unconvinced, and frustrated. They watched the ideal man of their dreams walking away with a girl, hand in hand. Their hearts broke into pieces. Seated inside the Emperor car, Debbie and Carlos were in the back seat, while Tristan was in the passenger seat. The driver started the engine and swiftly drove off. No one broke the silence on the way to the villa. As the car halted to a stop, Tristan bid them goodbye at the entrance and closed the gates behind him. Debbie confronted Carlos, who was now drinking water. Carlos, I really appreciate the way you saved me in that club. Now that we are home and nobody is watching us, I hope you can call your lawyer and tell him not to make me the owner of that club. You know for a fact that I'm currently studying. Who knows, the two of us might even get a D. Meeting Carlos' eyes, she swallowed back the word divorce and didn't dare to complete her sentence. Carlos was holding a glass in one hand with a firm grip. He was now staring at her with fierce eyes as if he were going to kill her right that instant if she dared to say that word. She really couldn't understand why he hated so much to divorce her. Oh, for heaven's sake, why can't you just sign the D? Fine, I won't say the word again. Don't look at me like that. I'm really serious. Did my father give you a large fortune with the condition that you must be my husband your whole life? She really couldn't find another acceptable reason except for this one. Normally, marriage should be based on love. But she didn't love him, and she didn't fancy the idea that he loved her. Wait, is there a possibility that he fall in love with me? Thinking about this, she couldn't help but burst into laughter. How's that possible? A rich and powerful man like Carlos would never fall in love with a boyish girl like me, she mused. Carlos poured a glass of water, gave it to her and said, Are you not thirsty? You've been talking since we arrived. I am. She took the glass over and drank all the water with one gulp. All of a sudden, she felt hungry. Although there had been lots of delicious dishes prepared at the gathering this evening, she had no appetite and had barely eaten. It was past 8 p.m. and she wanted to leave the villa and grab something to eat. Carlos Hua, I want to go out to eat something. Are you coming with me? She invited. Carlos just looked at her, saying nothing. She didn't know what was on his mind and assumed that he didn't want to. She took out her phone and said, Since you're not coming with me, I'm calling my friend to come with me. Who? Jared. I guess he hasn't eaten anything either. Before she was able to dial his number, her phone was snatched away by the man. Carlos turned off her phone, put it in his pocket and walked towards the gates. While putting his shoes on, he said, Grab the car keys. You're driving. Oh, okay. She nodded. For her, I would be a good idea since she knew he had drunk much this evening. She drove the BMW cautiously. When she stopped at a red light, she tilted her head and stole a look at the man who was taking a rest in his seat with his eyes shut. Carlos Hua, call your lawyer now, she demanded. Although Carlos had heard Debbie's words clearly, he didn't respond, choosing to look out the car window instead. You are not calling your lawyer? Fine. I'll call Emmett and ask him to call your lawyer. Debbie said as she called out the address book on the vehicle navigation screen. Without my consent, he won't call the lawyer. The man finally opened his mouth to speak. Then call him, she demanded. Focus on driving. I'm a man of my word. I won't rescind my decision. As the light changed, Debbie had to restart the engine. While focusing on the road, she asked, "What do you prefer to eat?" After all, he was the boss. "Eat whatever you want," he said indifferently. Undecided on where to go, Debbie ran a few names of familiar places through her mind. At last, a restaurant popped up. She drove to the destination and pulled over. When they got out of the car, Carlos' face soured at the sight of the restaurant. Debbie gave him a big grin and, pointing to the restaurant, said, "I suddenly want to eat durian pizza. That's why I drove here. I know the restaurant might be a little too cheap for your fancy, but it's much better than street food, right? Come on, just give it a try." It was a national chain restaurant and the food was pretty good. The chain operated stores in most of the leading shopping malls. To Debbie, it was a nice restaurant. To Carlos, however, it was one of those low-end places he associated with needless penny-pinching. After a moment's thought, he acceded, albeit begrudgingly, and walked towards the entrance of the restaurant. Debbie immediately followed after him. It was 8 p.m., but the place was still bustling with customers. Debbie and Carlos sat at a table near the window. Among the patrons, a few heads turned to greet the arrival of the beautiful couple. A waitress came to them, and when she noticed Carlos, her eyes widened. Debbie shook her head with resignation and looked at the menu. A large-sized durian pizza, a durian multi-layer cake, paella, and Spanish mackerel dumplings. "I'm done. What would you like to eat?" She put the menu in front of Carlos, but he didn't give it even the mere dignity of a cursory glance. "I already ate," he said, the disinterest in his voice showing. "What?" asked a bemused Debbie. Why did he have to come along if he thought it was low grade? Whatever the case, he could as well walk out because she was not holding a gun to his head. Is it possible that he just wanted to accompany me? Her heart raced at the very thought, but she had to calm down because she needed to talk to Carlos about the ownership of that club. So after the waitress had left, she tapped the table to attract his attention. Actually, I'm not that kind of good girl." Before she could finish her sentence, he cut in, "I knew it," to which Debbie blushed. She wanted to say something, but her jaw went slack. Carlos then added, "You'll be just fine. It's only a matter of time." He swore to himself that he would turn her into the perfect girl. "Wait, what are we talking about? I wasn't going to discuss with him whether I'm a good girl or not." She shook the weird feeling off, leaned toward him and said in a serious tone, "Are you sure you want to transfer the club to me? I believe it will go bankrupt within half a year." "Oh no, within 3 months." Leaning forward as well, Carlos said in a low, attractive voice, "Rest assured, you need to do nothing but count the money. There will be a professional team to run the club. Besides appointing her as the lawful owner of the club, he'd also gradually turn more and more shares to her. Whichever the case, she'd be taking home huge bonuses." Debbie didn't know how to turn his tempting offer down. The business offer aside, his chiseled looks were so inviting, she feared she'd give in to him at any moment. With a blushed face, she leaned back to keep him at arm's length. "There's no pressure to appoint me the owner. That points me in a bad light. I'm not a gold digger. How about this? As long as you don't make me the owner, I won't divorce you," she offered. To be honest, it was not a bad idea to have a husband like Carlos. He was handsome, rich, and powerful. Just the right response that I wanted, thought Carlos. He heaved a sigh of relief that he managed to have her rule out divorce. However, he kept calm and composed. "Don't bother bargaining with me. I don't think you're capable of it yet. I can assure you that you'll be the owner of the club. And forget about the divorce, as that's impossible." "No. Why is he being so bossy?" Debbie rolled her eyes. Soon, the durian pizza was served. The aroma made her drool as she picked up the pizza cutter in a hurry. Just as she was about to cut the pizza, Carlos took the cutter from her hand. By the time she raised her head to object, she realized he had already rolled his sleeves up. He cut the pizza in an elegant manner. Then he picked up a slice of pizza and put it onto Debbie's plate. The little gesture touched her. To her, such small acts of kindness meant a lot. All her life, she had always been an independent girl who was used to living on her own. Apart from her late father, she had never depended on a soul. As such, that simple courtesy from Carlos was something she appreciated. Much of the time, the men in her life tended to be cautious about her independent nature, and they ended up not being much helpful. For example, her best buddy, Jared, had never treated her like a girl who could use a bit of chivalry. As for Hayden, whom she had dated for 2 years, they had never eaten anything fancy together. In fact, she had been the one who provided everything in that relationship. All that Hayden did was to drain her, always taking things from her. A boring, self-serving man. "Why not eat?" asked Carlos, who had already sliced the pizza into pieces. When he realized Debbie was distrait, he dropped the cutter just hard enough to jerk her back to the present. Embarrassed at her lapse, Debbie tried to act calm as she picked up her knife and fork. After several bites, she noticed that Carlos didn't eat. "Please have some," she offered. Then she stretched her hand to pick up Carlos' knife and fork, which he had pushed away. But he stopped her. "No need for that." He politely declined her offer. In reality, he was not a big fan of durian. Almost loathed the stuff. "But I ordered for both of us." It was a large-sized pizza, a little too much for one person, in addition to the other food she had ordered. Looking her straight in the eye, Carlos reached out his hand and gently took her fork with the piece of pizza on it. A broad smile forming on his lips, he took a careful bite, catching Debbie by surprise once more. I already bit on it," she stammered. As if he didn't hear her, Carlos picked up a napkin and wiped the corner of his mouth. After swallowing, he took his sweet time, before finally replying, "I knew you had bitten on it." Blushing now, Debbie was lost for words. Every time she finished a piece of pizza, Carlos would add another slice to her plate. Apparently, she must have been very hungry. She went through the food faster than a hot knife through butter. It was only when she realized she had wiped all the plates clean then she felt embarrassed. "Did I eat too much?" she murmured. Wasn't that too much for someone to finish in one sitting? She felt even more embarrassed. Anyway, she chose to focus on Carlos. That guilty trip she was starting on was not necessary for now. She hesitated, trying to find the right reaction to Carlos' admission. Why had he changed his mind to bite on her pizza, which he thought was too cheap for his sophisticated tastes? Again her mind went back to how much she had eaten, while he watched. "It's up to him if he wants to compare me to as many girls who only nibble at food," she dismissively thought. None of that was important to Carlos, though. Like a gentleman, he picked up a serviette and wiped the rice at the corner of her mouth. "A good appetite is a blessing," he commented. To see if he was kidding, Debbie studied him up and down. However, from the look on his face, she realized he must have been as serious as her life. "Oh, that's so kind of you," she said, giggling like a teenage girl in love. On second thought, however, she told herself not to get carried away. There was nothing special about Carlos' words. Her father had always said the same. All the same, she began to feel at ease in his presence again. When they walked out of the restaurant, it was about 10 o'clock in the evening. Carlos went to a nearby convenience store, bought 2 bottles of water and handed her one. "Rinse your mouth," he suggested. Okay. "Thank you," Debbie murmured as she took the water bottle from Carlos. Before she could remove the cap, Carlos had already rinsed his mouth and drunk up the water. Out of curiosity, she asked, "Were you that thirsty? There's a residual taste of durian in my mouth." "What? He dislikes durian? Then why did he eat the pizza using my fork?" "Since he loathes durian, I've an interesting idea," If he dares to bully me again, I'll buy a durian and ask him to finish it all by himself. That should teach him a lesson, she thought to herself. Upon seeing the man throw the empty bottle into a trash bin, Debbie flashed a sly smile as she licked the corners of her lips. "Hey, Mr. Handsome." She ended up jumping before him. "Uh-huh." He looked at her, startled. Suddenly, she held him by his waist, stood on tiptoe and kissed his thin lips. This was her first time to kiss the man on her own initiative. It was an entirely different experience. No, it was her second time, wasn't it? Carlos remained stunned for a while. When he finally regained his full senses after the unexpected display of affection, he realized her true intentions. He felt uneasy and wanted to push her away. Debbie held his waist tightly and her tongue moved effortlessly in his mouth. She had just hogged a large-sized durian pizza and had not rinsed her mouth yet. After making sure that his mouth tasted durian again, she withdrew her lips and let go of his waist. Carlos shook his head with profound resignation, and then turned around to walk towards the convenience store again. "I want to go home. Now." Debbie grabbed his arm and dragged him to their car deliberately. Despite the fact that he could easily shake her arms off, he followed her anyway. Right under the glow of the street lamp, Debbie opened the passenger's door and was about to push Carlos into the seat, but he quickly shut the door by himself. Without a moment's pause, he rolled her around, pressed her against the car door, and kissed her on her lips. It all happened in a matter of seconds that she couldn't properly breathe. When Carlos' phone rang, the two stopped their overflowing affection for each other to an abrupt halt. It took quite a while before Debbie realized that she was lying in the back seat and Carlos was about to strip her off. She could even feel his erection. He wanted to switch his phone off and get on with his intentions, but she pushed him away, adjusted her clothes, and swiftly got out of the car. When she got into the driver's seat, Carlos was on the phone. "You called me just because of this?" His voice seemed to croak. "Damon, I have some exclusive information regarding the woman's whereabouts, but I've no intention of telling you." Saying this, he hung up. As if it was not enough to vent his anger, he even turned off his phone. Neither Debbie nor Carlos said a word throughout their way home. Upon arriving at the villa, Debbie reassured that the car doors were locked, grabbed the car keys, and rushed towards the house. When she ran upstairs, Carlos' voice seemed to come from behind her back. "What is next to you?" What's next to me?" Debbie stopped, turned her head in utter confusion. "I think I saw a figure next to you. Perhaps my eyes have begun deceiving me," Carlos said. Debbie was rendered speechless. She could feel her mouth going dry. She continued ascending upstairs. The light was switched off in the hallway, so she took out her phone and used the phone's flashlight. "I saw a movie yesterday. The male lead kills his wife's lover, dismembers him mercilessly, and hides various parts of his body in the refrigerator, under the bed, in the closet." Before he could finish his sentence, her scream interrupted him. "Carlos, what?" Trying to suppress his giggle, Carlos asked, feigning innocence. "I'm here. What's up?" Debbie ground her teeth and cursed him inside her head. "He is such a petty man." Producing a forced fake smile, she said, "I won't force you to eat durian again."
"I'm sorry."
"Ha!" He walked up the stairs. He hadn't achieved his aim yet. Pretending to be unaware of Debbie's fright, he continued, "Do you believe in the existence of ghosts? Where adventures await between lines?" Debbie fidgeted, covered his mouth with both her hands, and threatened, "Just shut your damned mouth. I don't want to hear a word more. If you dare to say a single word more, I swear, I'll repay in ways you can't imagine." She had absolutely no idea how she was going to hurt a man who had better martial skills than her. She looked at him with desperate eyes, as if she was about to break open her heart. She was not pretending. In fact, she really felt like crying her heart out. She swore to herself that she would certainly investigate and find out who had told Carlos that she was afraid of ghosts. She would teach that person a good lesson after she knew who this damn guy was. She foresaw that Carlos would definitely use her weaknesses to deal with her in the future as well. This wasn't the end of this. It's gotten very late. Good night. Carlos struggled his level best to fight off the impulse to hold her in his arms and retreated towards his bedroom. The surroundings remained eerily quiet for a few hours. The door of Carlos' bedroom opened from the outside abruptly. The man in the bed swayed his lips in the dark. He kept his eyes shut, pretending to be sound asleep. Soon, he sensed the familiar fragrance of his wife and he heard her lying down beside him. Debbie approached him stealthily and stared at his face cautiously. Luckily, he's asleep. It's all his fault. I had been able to sleep on my own before he moved back into the villa. But ever since he left me in the cemetery, my fright for the dark has crossed every boundary imaginable. As long as he's lying by my side, I'm not afraid of anything anymore. Fine. I'll sneak into his bedroom every night after he's asleep, she told herself confidently. She adjusted her posture and made herself comfortable before she closed her eyes and soon dozed off. Initially, she had planned to get out of the bed and sneak back into her room before Carlos woke up. However, when she woke up the next morning, she felt the golden rays of the morning sun glaze her cheeks. She sat up and scanned the room with her sleepy eyes. All of a sudden, her eyes widened and she came fully awake and alert. Carlos had just taken a shower after his routine morning run and was answering a phone call with his back facing her. His body was only wrapped in a towel. It was the first time that she had seen Carlos half naked. Although they had slept in the same bed twice, she had come into his room at midnight and hadn't seen him wrapped in just a towel any time before. Wow, his body is flawless. She was letting her imagination run wild. Judging from his strong back, she reckoned that he had been doing regular exercise. He must have six-pack abs. She picked up her phone stealthily, opened the camera app and clicked the shooting button. Done. She glanced at the picture she had just taken and flashed a dirty smile. All of a sudden, she thought of something. She put down her phone on the bed, crossed her hands together and pointed to Carlos' towel with both her index fingers. Drop! Drop! She commanded in a whisper. She stared at the white towel and wished it would fall onto the ground. She could tell from the curves of the towel that the man had a desirable butt. Drop! Drop! Oh! The man suddenly turned around and caught Debbie off guard. She immediately withdrew her hands, grabbed her phone, got out of the bed and left his bedroom hastily. She rushed back into her room, shut the door behind her and threw herself onto her bed. Yang, what would he think of me now? Would he think I wanted to sleep with him because I have a thing for him? Never mind. He's my husband, and it's perfectly normal for us to share a bed. She consoled herself in her mind. She opened her WeChat moments, uploaded the picture she had just taken, and captioned it. Waking up in the morning, I find the sun shining brightly. You stand before the window, enjoying the scenery, while I can't take my eyes off you. I'm in such a buoyant mood now. The reason she dared to post Carlos' picture in WeChat moments was that she thought he was not her WeChat friend. He would not know that she had taken his picture and posted it after all. As for her friends, she didn't think they would recognize it as Carlos. It was just a view of his back. Yes, some people might speak ill of her behind her back when they saw the picture, but she didn't care at all. Debbie could foresee on her mind what her WeChat friends would say when they saw her post, but she didn't care about it. Gaily humming a song, she threw her phone on her bed and went into the bathroom. Hey, I just met you and this is crazy, but here's my number, so call me maybe. Feeling refreshed after her shower, she came out of the bathroom and grabbed her phone. Unlocking it, she was surprised to see that her WeChat moments had been flooded with thousands of comments. A girl from her class commented, "Debbie, do you live with a man?" Another classmate said, "Wow, this man has a perfect body. Debbie, why don't you introduce him to me?"
Journey beyond the imagination with Snevi.
Is Mr. Hood in bed? How long did he last? Tell me, Casey commented. She also added an emoji showing a wicked grin. Christina cracked a joke. Debbie, to tell you the truth, I've been drooling over your husband's face for a long time. Since we are best friends, can you share him with me? The comment was followed by a shy emoji. Jared said, Tomboy, I really admire you. Now you are not just Mrs. Hua by name. You are already his woman. I've made up my mind that I'll be one of your loyal lackeys from now on. Dixon commented. What did Christina comment? Tell me please. Debbie's eyes widened in shock, and her mouth was held open for almost a minute. She had more than 1,000 friends on WeChat. Thus, she gave up because the comments were too many to read. She even felt a little dizzy after reading the first 10 comments. Wow, Carlos back attracted so much attention. What if I take a picture of his face and post it online? No, I can't do that. If I did that, my phone would lag with so many comments, she thought. She updated her moments and found out that someone had already had a screenshot of her post and reposted it. Headlines of Economics and Management School. Irrefutable evidence shows that Debbie Nguyen is living with a man. I saw this man's picture in my WeChat moments this morning. Who is this handsome man? Wow, if I had a boyfriend like this, I could stay in the bedroom with him the whole day. These were some of the captions from the posts made by Debbie's WeChat friends. How the post went viral was beyond Debbie's expectation. Desperately, she wanted to delete her post. But on second thought, it was no use doing so as many of her friends had already had the screenshot. After short consideration, she commented the post, You guys took it all wrong. I've just downloaded this picture from the net and posted it. Gail commented in just a few seconds, I knew it. Debbie was held speechless and wondered, is she keeping an eye on my WeChat moments? She decided to get back at Gail, so she replied to her comment, I know this man, and we're closely related. Only their common WeChat friends could see her conversation with Gail, and since they barely had common WeChat friends, Debbie thought it would be safe because other people wouldn't see it. On Gail's end, the moment she saw Debbie's reply, the first person that came to her mind was Carlos. She grew insanely jealous and began to console herself. Calm down. Mr. Hua would never fall for a girl like Debbie Nguyen. The comments and messages on her phone kept on popping up. Debbie threw her phone aside and rubbed her aching temples. She decided to leave it aside and went to the dining room to have breakfast first. It was Saturday and she had arranged with her friends to go shopping. When she entered the living room, Julie was opening the gates for Carlos. Debbie ran towards him and called out, Hey, old man. Carlos turned around, waiting for her next words. Julie giggled and said, Debbie, why did you call Mr. Hua old man? I thought a young girl like you would address your husband as honey. Debbie flushed scarlet with embarrassment. She tugged on Julie's sleeve and Julie instantly got her point. Ah, you have your own sweet words to address him, don't you? I'm going to the kitchen now, Julie said with a sly smile. Debbie's face turned redder. After Julie had left, Debbie gathered up her courage and asked, Can I go out this afternoon? I have an appointment with my friends. The reason she dared to skip yesterday's yoga class was that the yoga teacher was hired by Tristan and she didn't have Carlos' phone number. That meant the yoga teacher couldn't tell Carlos she was not attending classes. The dance teacher, however, knew Carlos. Debbie didn't dare to skip the dance class as she was afraid that the dance teacher would report to him. This time, she decided to ask for his permission first. Friends? Who? Carlos asked in a low voice. Debbie sighed and answered, Jared, Casey, Christina, and Dixon. As a straightforward person, she had many friends, while the 4 people she had mentioned were her best friends. They always hung out together. I think you'd better keep Jared at arm's length, Carlos said coldly. Judging from what had happened last night, he could tell that Jared would just add fuel if Debbie started a fire. Jared and Debbie were both short-tempered. If Carlos had not been in the club last night, both of them would have made things worse. Why did he ask me to stay away from Jared? Debbie asked herself silently as she was confused by Carlos' statement. Carlos raised his wrist to check the time. I'll arrange a private booth for you and your friends on the 5th floor of the Alioth building. You may have lunch there. Tristan will call you later. He agrees? Yeah. Debbie gave him a big grin and said, "Thank you so much. Do you want me to buy something for you in the mall?" Hardly had she finished her sentence when she regretted asking him. A rich man like Carlos would want nothing. Yes. His answer came as a surprise to Debbie. What? She asked, puzzled. He leaned forward and said something in her ear before turning around to leave. Debbie stood still where she was, stunned. Oh, for goodness sake, why did he ask me to buy some underwear for him? In the shining International Plaza. When everyone had arrived at their meeting place, Jared yawned and complained, "Gimme a break, girls. I don't want to watch a movie." After Debbie had left with Carlos last night, Damon and Jared went back to the private booth to drink together. They hadn't been home until 3 o'clock in the morning. Jared scarcely had a decent sleep when his friends called him. Debbie and Casey's idol was in the movie they were planning to watch. As avid fans, how could they miss out on the chance to watch the movie? "Why don't you go back home and take a rest first?" Debbie asked Jared in a serious tone. Jared nodded. He was really sleepy. When he turned around and was about to leave, Debbie told Casey in a loud voice, "Casey, we will be having lunch on the 5th floor of the Alioth building. Carlos has arranged a private booth for us." Instantly, Jared turned around, and with an excited look, he asked, "Really? We're having lunch there? Your husband asked his men to throw you out of the Alioth building last time. Why did he arrange a private booth for us this time?" Casey patted his shoulder and explained, "Mr. Hu didn't know Debbie was his wife back then. Debbie had already told Casey and Christina what had happened between her and Carlos before. Dixon also knew the story from Christina. Only Jared knew nothing. That surprised him just now. He didn't know Debbie was his wife? Jared was shocked by the news. Was it even possible that a man didn't know who his wife was? Besides, the man was none other than Carlos Hua. Although rich people usually got married for commercial reason, it was still impossible for Carlos not to know his wife. Out of the corner of her eyes, Debbie saw a brand shop and an idea suddenly struck her. She turned to Jared. "Carlos knows I'm his wife now, so stop being caught up in that. Hey bro, could you please do me a favor in return since I'm going to buy you lunch?" She coaxed him. "No problem." Jared agreed at once. He was baffled, however, why Debbie couldn't keep herself from smiling. When Jared got out of the shop with a box of men's underpants in his hand, he almost cried and asked Debbie, "Why did you ask me to buy these underpants for your husband? It's so weird." He was a man and Carlos was a man as well. A man buying another man underpants? That really sounded creepy. "Why did I have to buy underpants for Carlos?" he shouted inwardly. Jared felt like he had been tricked by Debbie. When Jared's friends found out he just bought fresh underpants for Carlos, they all burst into laughter. Some held their stomachs, trying to catch their breath in between. "You crazy bastard," one of them even said. "So, man, have you imagined Carlos dominating you on bed?" Casey teased. "Like, you jack off as you imagine him blowing you off?" Jared's cheeks turned red in embarrassment. Annoyed, he shouted, "Stop it! I'm straight as hell. I'm not gay." The elevator finally came to a halt when it reached the 5th floor of the Alioth building and Tristan greeted them. Upon seeing Debbie, he walked up to her along with the manager. "Good day, Mrs. Hua. Welcome." Debbie's eyes widened as she saw Tristan. She felt a bit shy when he addressed her as Mrs. Hua. Then she turned to her friends and gestured towards him. "Guys, this is Tristan Zheng, Carlos' secretary. Good day." Her friends greeted him and felt shy as he gave them a polite bow. "Good day to you as well," Tristan smiled. "Follow us and we shall lead you to the best private booth in this building." Debbie and her friends felt uneasy as they sat down. Tristan and some waitresses served the dishes. And obviously it was something Carlos' secretary shouldn't do. She took the seafood platter from him and offered, "Tristan, There's no need to do this. Just sit down and have a meal with us. Tristan shook his head, smiling as he bowed. Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Hua, but I am afraid that I'll have to turn down your invitation. I have to go back to the office later.
VBN. Elevating stories, elevating minds.
Debbie didn't protest and gave him a smile. Is that so? Since you still have work to finish, it's best to take your leave now. Don't worry, I can take care of my guests. That's right, Christina nodded. You are being too kind to us. Don't mind us. We're old enough to take care of ourselves. She felt like she was in seventh heaven, as it was the first time she had entered such a fancy restaurant. She felt a bit shy with the hospitality shown by Tristan and the manager. As for Jared, he felt at home. After all, he came from a wealthy family and was used to these kinds of places. He gave a smirk to Debbie. Hey, tomboy, since I got your husband some underpants, can you ask him to give me a VIP card of this restaurant? Debbie rolled her eyes and replied sarcastically, Oh, sure, I will. Really? Jared laughed.
No.
I don't have the VIP card myself either, Debbie retorted, her face deadpan. Having these kinds of banters with Jared wasn't new to her anyways. At the end of the day, it was just a friendly exchange between friends. Tristan overheard their conversation and felt the need to explain it. Mrs. Hua, as per Mr. Hua's request, I have already informed the manager about the matter. You are always free to eat here in Mr. Carlos' private booth. No need to pay anything. As for your friends, you can give the VIP cards to them if you wish. Debbie's friends' jaws dropped at what they had just heard. They all felt envious of the special treatment she received. Casey grinned. Looks like you have done something in your past life to be blessed to be Carlos' wife. He's every woman's dream man. Damn, girl. Is Carlos open to the idea of being polygamous? If he is, then let me share him with you. Page. She got interrupted when Debbie put a piece of chocolate into her mouth. The others only laughed at her joke. Debbie looked amused and said, Sure, I don't mind, but we'll see if Carlos agrees. Anyways, let's eat.
I'm starving.
Since it's the 21st century, time to take some food porn photos. Casey chuckled. Better post it on WeChat. Each of them whipped out their phones and took photos of the scrumptious, well-prepared dishes. Debbie whispered to Tristan, Can I just give each of them a VIP card? It would be unfair to the others if only Jared got one. Tristan answered with a smile. Of course, Mrs. Hua. I'll tell the manager to give each of them a VIP card. Upon hearing this, Dixon almost spat out his drink. He quickly cut in, Girl, no need for that. I can't afford to go to a fancy place like this after all. Christina seconded. He's right, Debbie. Just give Casey and Jared the cards. You can take us to have meals here in the future. Debbie waved her hands, shrugging off their protests. Nah, it's not a big deal. It's just a card. Are you sure? Christina looked puzzled. Yep, Debbie nodded. Jared added, Tomboy, I'm just kidding around. No need to give me the card. I'm fine as long as I can book a private room in this place. The other three nodded their heads in agreement. Carlos was Debbie's husband, and they felt that it would be shameful of them if they even dared to ask for more. Debbie, it's all right, Casey smiled. You are already kind enough to invite us for a meal here. Debbie could only sigh. Very well then. She wanted to tell them, if I'm still with Carlos in the future, then I'll bring you guys here many times as possible. But she couldn't say it out loud since Tristan was still around. She saw him calling someone on his phone. The dishes were served quickly. There were 10 main courses, mushroom soup, some mousse cakes, flan, and a fruit platter. To top it off, the waitresses also served them some green tea and a bottle of fancy wine. Joining her friends who posted photos on social media, Debbie posted 9 photos in WeChat moments and captioned, Great food, great company, great time. As they enjoyed the dishes, Casey kept prying Debbie about her sex life with Carlos. Girl, you should tie him up and ride him. Men love that kind of thing. It's bound to blow his mind off. Then they felt their spines shiver as they heard the door open. Their cheerful banter gradually faded. Debbie's face turned into different shades of scarlet as she recalled Casey's words. The next thing she knew, they all stood up from their seats. Christina was so nervous by Carlos' sudden appearance, she accidentally kicked her chair as she stood up. She chewed her lower lip, trying to avoid Carlos' gaze. Debbie was forced to put on a cheery facade. I didn't expect you to pay us a visit. Oh man, she thought to herself. This is really embarrassing. Heavens help me if he ever heard any word from Casey a while ago. Carlos walked towards her. I'm just passing by. Tristan secretly shook his head behind Carlos. He perfectly knew that Carlos had canceled a meeting just to see her for lunch. A waitress immediately brought an extra, prepared set, and poured a glass of red wine and a cup of tea. She gave Carlos a polite bow when she was done. Carlos sat down. He looked across them and said coldly, "Have a seat." They obediently sat down. Jared chewed his lower lip. His right eye twitched as he remembered that he bought underwear for the man in front of him. As silence filled the air, the waitresses quickly removed the dishes and brought new sets of dishes. Tristan was about to serve Carlos food when the latter raised a hand to stop him. He wiped his hands with a clean towel and silently looked at Debbie. Then he slightly cocked his head to the side. His eyes moved at his empty plate and then back at her. It was obvious that he was asking, no, ordering her to serve him. Debbie couldn't do anything but only stare at him in awe. She wouldn't dare to turn him down in front of so many people. She also felt her friend's eyes boring into her and observing her every move. It seemed like they were interested in knowing how she interacted with him. Debbie took a deep breath, calming herself down. She thought to herself, "You can do this, Debbie. Patience is a virtue. Don't lose it." Debbie's eyes scanned across the dishes near her. Then she smirked a bit as she laid her eyes on the raw trout. She hummed lightly and picked up a pair of chopsticks. She took some trout, dipped it in mustard, and then aimed it towards his lips. "Here, open up," she said in a sing-song voice. Her friends looked at her as if she were crazy. It was shocking enough that she was feeding Carlos, but that much mustard? Is that even edible? Whispered Casey. She was cringing along with Jared and Dixon while Christina tried to keep to her composure. "Will he eat it though?" Christina asked. Carlos studied the mustard-wrapped trout before opening his mouth to eat it. Before Debbie could pull out her hand, she felt a hand grabbing her by the head. Her hand dropped the chopsticks as she felt Carlos' mouth press down on hers. What the hell?" she exclaimed in her mind. "Your escape into infinite tales." "Oh my God," Casey shouted. "I gotta take a pic and put it on WeChat." Jared, Christina, and Dixon cheered and whistled at the scene upon them. She felt his tongue probing the food towards her mouth. The excessive mustard was already making her face red. It even made her nose sore and her eyes started to water. She had this strong urge to punch him, but not right now. She wanted to spit it out, but this man kept pressing on, making sure he didn't let her go. "This isn't a kiss. Damn it!" she screamed in her thoughts. "I really want to crush his balls right now." Her tears started to fall. Her hands trembled as she gripped his jacket. "Looks like I didn't see that coming. Two can play this game." Her grip loosened and she snaked her arms around his neck. A moment later, they were already making out passionately in front of their guests. She was gliding her fingers into his hair as his hand slipped from her head to waist. The other four stared at the scene awkwardly. Jared sighed, scratching his nape. When did Debbie get this soft? Meanwhile, Dixon, who rarely cursed, spoke up. "Are we gonna fucking eat, or are they gonna eat each other? I am so hungry as hell already. I want to eat. Can't they get a fucking room?" Meanwhile, Christina's eyes sparkled as she clasped her hands together like a fangirl. "Oh my, our Debbie is actually kissing Carlos Hua. How did she manage to unfreeze his cold heart?" Casey nodded. I know, right? Our Debbie has grown. She's now kissing a hot rich guy. Shouldn't we excuse ourselves? I mean, things are getting heated up. A large growling sound filled the room, but the two wouldn't stop making out. The rest looked at each other, shrugged, and then started to eat. After a while, Carlos finally released the struggling woman in his arms. As soon as Debbie caught her breath, she immediately sat down. She picked up a cup of tea and drank it to calm herself down. Ugh! She poured herself another cup, which brought her back to earth. Carlos, however, was calm as if nothing had happened. He fixed his collar and tie and started eating. As if to comfort Debbie, he put some of the Australian sirloin on her plate. Eat, he spoke, his tone remaining indifferent. Finally, thank God, Jared exclaimed in relief. I thought you guys were going to fuck or something, which is something I don't want to see. If this were somebody else, he would have flipped the table. But this was his best friend, Debbie, and her husband, the powerful Carlos Hua. For the first time, Jared saw Debbie get soft. Usually she was rash and casual in manner. What the hell? Humph. Debbie even isn't herself anymore around Carlos Hua. He drank some water to calm himself down. How much longer? This meal is frigging killing me. He fumed inwardly. Meanwhile, Carlos wiped his hands and spoke to Tristan without looking at him. Tristan, the cards. Tristan took out a few cards from his breast pocket and presented them to Carlos. Here they are, sir. Good, Carlos only said, nodding. With Carlos' permission, Tristan handed the 4 VIP cards for the 5th floor of Alioth building one by one to Debbie's friends. He handed the first one to Jared. Jared's eyes widened in delight when he took the gilt card. He cheered and gave it a kiss. Then a thought rang in Jared's head. With this card, I can come to this place whenever I want. But why do I have to stay longer, watching those two being sappy together? He assumed an air of composure and turned to Debbie. Tomboy, take good care of Mr. Hua. I'll see you guys later, he announced before leaving the table. The other 3 followed Jared and stood up from the table too. Jared stood aside and waited for them to leave together. Next, Tristan went to Casey. She grabbed the card in her purse and whispered to Debbie, Girl, Mr. Hua is a keeper. If you try to divorce him, I will punch your gut. Debbie only looked at her coldly as her thoughts went, You traitor. Christina actually intended not to accept the card, but it felt disrespectful if she refused it. Despite her reluctance, she still took the card and grabbed Dixon's hand before she said to Debbie, Deb, now that we have this card, we can come here anytime, so we'll just leave you and Mr. Hua alone now. Be nice to him, all right? Another traitor, Debbie thought, as if making a hit list. Please don't ditch me, Dixon. Debbie thought hopefully, chewing her lip. She knew how honest and upright Dixon was. He was all she had. I can't just accept that, thought Dixon. His hesitance caused Debbie to feel relieved. Tristan chuckled. No need to worry about it. Think of it as a little token from Mr. Hua. You have been always a good friend to Mrs. Hua, and it means a lot to both Mr. Hua and Mrs. Hua. Besides, I've heard that your brother is having some problems with transferring school. It's said that new school's principal loves dining here. Damn, Tristan sure did his research well. Debbie thought, chewing her lip. Dixon went silent and he was stunned. Unable to find any reason not to take the card, he rolled his eyes at Jared. Thanks a lot, stupid pants. This is all your fault. Now I have a debt of gratitude to Carlos. Ugh, thank you. Dixon finally took the card. He waved at Debbie and took Kristen's hand, ready to leave the place. Some friends, Debbie shouted in her mind. They just told me that they wouldn't take the cards. But by the look of it, it seems like Carlos Hua has already bought their soul. Traitors. Debbie was already fuming internally, especially Jared. I'll make sure to crush his balls so he will never forget. Jared Carlos suddenly spoke up. Yes, sir. Jared responded and felt shivers traveling down his spine. Debbie rolled her eyes and sneered. What happened to Mr. Han the Fearless? I didn't expect you to get this soft and weak in front of Carlos Hua. Jared chuckled, embarrassed. Well, he's your husband, after all. Of course, I should show some respect to him. Carlos raised his hand to Tristan, and the latter soon handed a bag to Jared. It was the underwear Jared had bought for Carlos. Debbie felt so embarrassed when everyone saw what was in the bag. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her so bad. After a giggle to her friends, she covered her face with one hand awkwardly and lowered her head to sip tea. Carlos was aware that Jared and Debbie were just friends, but he couldn't stand her being close to another man. Young man, I can take care of my wife. You can just leave everything to me from now on, especially this kind of errand. You know, if you really care about my wife, you can give me a call if you think she needs somebody. Tristan, give him my phone number. Yes, Mr. Hua. Tristan replied. My wife. Those words rang in Jared's head. He just wanted to puke upon hearing them. To prove Carlos meant it, Tristan took out his phone and sent him Carlos' phone number. Jared, this is Mr. Hua's number. Everyone was surprised. Debbie wondered why Carlos was so possessive. Obviously, he was trying to keep her from Jared. Worried about where this was leading, she raised her head and declared, Jared and I are just good friends. How can you undermine our friendship like this? It's uncalled for. Unexpectedly, Jared cut in before Carlos could respond. Mr. Hua, I'm so glad to hear what you just said. Before, Debbie, the naive girl, did so much for Hayden. But the moron didn't appreciate it at all. Now, finally, there is a man who cares about her. I'll do anything you say. If Tomboy needs help or anything, I'll be the first to call you. Among Debbie's friends, Jared had known her for the longest time. He knew everything that happened between her and her ex-boyfriend Hayden. As far as he knew, Hayden was to blame for Debbie's tomboy tendencies. But right now, Debbie was surprised by something Jared had said. Since when did she become naive in Jared's eyes? Carlos was quite pleased with what Jared had said. Yet the name Hayden made his eyes dim. Tristan, send them home. Yes, Mr. Hua. When the couple were left alone in the private booth, Carlos turned to Debbie. Finding her in a daze, he pulled her into his arms and sat her on his lap. Unaccustomed to such intimacy, Debbie struggled to stand up, but Carlos wrapped his arms around her tighter and whispered in her ear, Hayden, huh? That was the first time he had heard that name, but quickly he connected the dots and remembered the man who had called her Deb in the messages and said he missed her. It must be the same guy. What? Debbie didn't understand what he had meant by that, but Carlos didn't explain. Instead, he kissed her. Apparently, he was angry. The kiss was impudent and overbearing, and his hands were not gentle either. In his grip, she now felt trapped and powerless, despite her many years of rigorous martial arts training. Next, he threw her onto the table roughly. Fearing that she might fall, Debbie locked her arms around Carlos' neck while his hands were all over her. After a long moment, the man said in a coarse voice, I take back what I said. Ha! Debbie, overwhelmed underneath his weight, muttered. At that moment, she wasn't that reckless tomboy anymore. She was a woman, a seductive woman. Every time he kissed her, she blushed. Right now, looking her in the eye, Carlos could hardly control his urge. I said the other day that if you slept with me, I would set you free. Now I want us to have another deal. Debbie hadn't expected a man of words like Carlos to take back his own offer. His hands tenderly moved all over her body, her face, her hair. With every touch, his breathing got heavier and heavier. God, you're such a femme fatale, a tormenting temptress.
A femme fatale?
Me, among many nicknames people gave her, she never heard anyone call her a temptress or femme fatale before. For her rather boyish personality and less feminine figure, that was a misnomer. Couldn't Carlos see that? There must be something wrong with his eyes. She wanted to laugh. The new deal is, if you sleep with me, I'll give you anything you want. Anything she wanted? If he had said this earlier on the stormy days of their relationship, she'd have told him she wanted a divorce without hesitation. But recently, she was beginning to have a change of mind. After shelving her push for a divorce, she actually didn't know what she wanted. When he saw her shaking her head, Carlos thought she didn't agree to his offer. Suddenly, Debbie remembered what he had said on the cruiser, how he had humiliated her, announcing that she wasn't worth $100 million. Tightening her grip on him, she assumed an air of dejection and said, "I remember the other day you said I wasn't worth much. What should I expect to get from a man who thinks I'm not worth a penny? Have you forgotten the way you put me down, Mr. Handsome?" Watching her leave, Carlos wondered. "I said I was sorry and I would like to make amends for my past mistakes. Why is she still mad?" Dissatisfied with how things went, Carlos quickened his pace and caught up with Debbie in the hallway. He startled her when he held her by the hand all of a sudden. Forcefully, she tried to wrench her hand free, but he tightly held on until they were in the elevator. "You haven't done your part yet. Now, I'll hang around to give you company while you do it," he declared. "Part? What part?" She was confused, but Carlos didn't answer as he quietly led her to the ground floor of Dubhe Building. When they came to a shop for men's fancy underwear, Debbie understood what he had meant by her part. She had passed by that shop without going in that morning. Now, with Carlos at her side, she didn't have a choice but to enter. Some shop assistants trotted over to them when they noticed Carlos. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hua," they greeted in unison. "Welcome, Mr. Hua," added one of them, a lady, apparently in charge of her colleagues. Carlos nodded at them before he took Debbie further inside. "Go find me something you like. I'll wait here," he urged. Then he turned around, found the nearest empty chair and sat down to wait for Debbie. Almost immediately, a shop assistant beaming a smile served him a cup of tea. Between sips, he kept himself busy, reading a catalog of products. Lost in a sea of expensive men's underwear, Debbie smiled awkwardly at the shop assistants who were guiding her around. To put herself at ease, she wandered around briefly, pretending to be at home. A pair of red briefs caught her eyes. The embarrassment on her face was gone. She snickered and went to Carlos. "Will you wear anything I buy?" she inquired. Carlos raised his head from the catalog. Although Debbie tried to look calm, her eyes betrayed her. To the mischievous look in her eyes, he sighed. "Yes, I will," he agreed. His affirmative reply almost made her jump with cheer. It took a bit of effort to restrain her emotions as she turned. But before she could take 2 steps, Carlos added, "Anything but briefs. Also, I hate red. Bummer." His response was like a wet blanket. It was the red briefs that she was considering buying him. With her plan ruined, Debbie pouted sullenly. "Okay, I got it," she said. Then she went back and wandered from section to section until she saw a pair of black boxers. Briefly, she picked it up and looked at Carlos, who was quietly seated on the sofa. Not good enough for him. She pursed her lips and put it down. Next, she picked up a gray pair, looked at the man, and shook her head again. Not good enough either. On careful observation of how Carlos and Debbie communicated, the shop assistants all wondered who the girl was. One of them was so curious she couldn't help asking Debbie, "What's your relationship with Mr. Hua?"
Journey beyond the imagination with Nevi.
Debbie gave her a friendly smile and, lowering her voice almost to a whisper, said, "Why don't you ask him?" Hands down, that scored the clincher for Debbie. The shop assistant was reduced to silence. "If I could ask Mr. Hua, I wouldn't have bothered you, madam," she thought sourly. After a long time of wandering and comparison, finally, Debbie settled on 3 pairs of boxers which came at a good $10,000 each. Standing at the cashier's desk, she winced at the price. Coming into the shop, she had not expected she'd end up spending such a ridiculous sum on a mere 3 goddamn boxers. What are these things made of? Gold. The shop assistants had recommended those boxers, claiming that the designer had several international accolades to his name. Even so, Debbie wouldn't have spent so much on them if Carlos hadn't been insisting on her buying him boxers. After settling the bill, she came to Carlos with the bag. Without a word, he put down the catalog and stood up, looking pleased. He took the bag from Debbie with one hand and held her hand with the other. Together, they walked off to their car, arm in arm, a peaceful couple together. Following after Carlos, Debbie asked, "Why did you ask me to buy these for you? How did you buy underwear before? I used to have them delivered to the villa or send my secretaries. Now, since I have a wife, naturally I should leave this kind of thing to her." Not in the mood for his endless witty banter, Debbie didn't say a word in return. Anyway, how was she supposed to respond to that? Just as they were about to enter the elevator, they noticed a commotion in front of a shop. Intuitively, they both stopped and turned to see what was happening in the clamoring crowd. A young couple were seen arguing with a cleaning lady who was in tears. The argument must have been going on for a while, but what irritated Debbie was that no one had cared enough to intervene. Seeing that she was still holding a grudge, Carlos smiled, gave her a kiss on the lips and said, "Forget about that, dear. To be honest, I wouldn't say you're worth 100 million. Just as he had expected, her eyes burned with anger, but he looked at her affectionately while stroking her hair. Of course, he was pulling her leg, but she didn't seem to get his drift. "Well, maybe you don't get the gist of it. You're worth far more than you seem to ask. $1 billion or even more is what I'd peg on a girl special like you. You misunderstood me." Debbie was left open-mouthed. Is he kidding me? Is he willing to give me that much just to sleep with me? This guy must be a joke. She brushed his words off. "I'm for real. If it's money that you want, I'll give you whatever sum you name." For her love, Carlos couldn't care less about money. Besides, they were husband and wife. What was his was hers too. It didn't make a difference who had the money. However, Debbie misunderstood him again. What does he take me for? A gold digger? The passion she had felt only a minute ago died out at once. In a huff, she pushed him off her abruptly. Carlos' eyes were filled with puzzlement. Debbie held her head high and tried to defend her honor. "Mr. Handsome, not everyone loves money as much as you think. Maybe in your mind you can buy me or even everything with your money. Unfortunately, that's not me. If I don't like you, I wouldn't sleep with you even if you gave me all the money in the world. But as long as I love you, I'll sleep with you even if you are dead broke. Sorry to tell you, I'm not who you think I am. Maybe you don't understand me, in which case I'd suggest we separate as soon as possible," she declared. She felt insulted. If it was his money she was after, she wouldn't have only taken a little from her monthly allowance, nor would she have asked for a divorce. Reading from a different script, however, Carlos found her charming at the moment. It was not because she didn't want his money. It was just that she looked so proud and confident when she told him what kind of person she was. Watching the serious look on her face when she spoke, Carlos let out a chuckle. However, that chuckle came across as a taunt. Debbie was too young to understand what he was thinking. "That's not funny," she snapped. "Let's go to the Civil Affairs Department and get a divorce right now. I will never bother you again." In the midst of her rant, however, Carlos leaned close and kissed her fiercely. Over the years, he might have had more than his fair share of women, but no one could come close to this special woman. No matter what her moods were, he always found her cute. By now, she had freed herself from his embrace. Angrily, she demanded, "Hey, what do you want?" Regardless of her obvious irritation, Carlos grabbed her tight again. He patted her back and comforted her. "Don't worry, I won't force you into anything, unless it is what you want." Somehow that relieved her, but she wanted an apology which he didn't seem ready to give directly. The ego problems, Debbie thought, your escape into infinite tales. Giving him an annoyed snort, she grabbed her backpack and was ready to leave. "Let me check what's up with the group. I'll catch up with you later if you don't mind." She let go of his hand and headed towards the ruckus. As she approached, Their voices became clearer. I'm very sorry. I didn't do it intentionally. The cleaning lady kept apologizing, weeping. What's going on here? Debbie asked, standing in front of the young couple with her hands in the pockets of her coat. The young man looked at her curtly and demanded, "Who the hell are you? It doesn't matter who I am. Just tell me what this is about." She replied nonchalantly. The cleaning lady sobbed, "Miss, I accidentally dirted his shoes with a wet mop while I was cleaning." "Dirted? Look at what you did. My shoes are all wet. What if they start peeling? Can you even afford the compensation?" The young man demanded angrily. Hearing compensation mentioned, the cleaning lady took 2 steps backward with fear and apologized again. "I'm sorry, son. I didn't see you. I'll wipe them clean for you right now." The young man snorted contemptuously. "Wipe? Are you deaf? You soaked my shoes and ruined the leather. What's the point of wiping?" Debbie stepped in front of the cleaning lady protectively and raised her head to face the young man. She already apologized, but you still think it's not enough. What do you want? What do I want? What do you think? Since my shoes are ruined, I have to get new ones. She should pay for them, of course. How much are your shoes? Debbie asked with a sneer. $830. The young man answered proudly with his nose in the air as if it were such a moment of glory to flaunt the price. I'm not leaving this place without the amount. He glanced sideways at the cleaning lady, expecting to see her scared face. Indeed, the cleaning lady got flustered at the price. But Debbie was amused by the stupid look on the young man's face. I'll pay for her, she declared. Shocked by what Debbie had said, the cleaning lady pulled her sleeve and said, Miss, you don't have anything to do with this. I can't let you do this. Debbie turned to look at her and smiled. It's okay. Don't worry. With the card Carlos had given her, a paltry $830 was not a problem, but it was a lot for a cleaning lady who made only $2,000 or $3,000 a month. The members of the martial arts club at her university had submitted membership fees the day before. It happened that she was carrying some of the cash on her. Without hesitation, she decided to use it to help the lady out. There was an ATM around, from which she'd withdraw the same amount to reimburse the club. With that thought, she took $850 from her purse and handed it to the brat. Here you have it. Keep the change. The young man felt embarrassed but took the money all the same. He grabbed his girlfriend's hand and was ready to leave. Not so fast, Debbie said calmly as she closed her purse. The young couple looked back, puzzled. Debbie pointed at the man's shoe and said, I paid the price. Shouldn't the shoe you're wearing be mine now? You may go, but leave the shoe. The young man's face turned livid, but he couldn't figure out a line to retort, because what she had said was right. The onlookers started whispering and exchanging surprised glances at the unfolding drama. Left with no choice, the man took his shoes off and tossed them on the floor. The sight of the worn shoes sickened Debbie. She held one shoe by the laces between her thumb and index finger and threw it in the air. Lifting her right leg, she kicked the stinky shoe into the green bin at the cleaning lady's side. After she had done the same with the other, the crowd clapped at her uprightness and cool moves. After the couple fled the scene with embarrassment, the cleaning lady thanked Debbie in tears. Since the matter was settled, Debbie turned around and left. Behind her, the cleaning lady's emotional words and the crowd's clapping filled the air. Debbie had thought Carlos had left, but there he was, waiting for her not far from the crowd, in sunglasses, with hands in his trouser pockets. Apologetically, she trotted to him. I thought you had left, she said, feeling like a young girl again. A very different feeling from the forceful woman she had been while confronting the little brat. Carlos opened his arms and received her with an embrace. I wouldn't have been able to see my wife's heroic acts if I had left. That would be a pity. I feel so honored to have you in my life. A long time ago, Debbie was out shopping with Hayden when she saw something similar happening at another mall. Someone asked a beggar to pay over $100 for a damaged battery charger. Debbie acted quickly and paid the fine for him. As a reward, she got a tongue lashing from Hayden, who blamed her for her stupidity and snooping. She wondered whether Carlos thought the same of her. Unsure what he would say, she kept her head down and wouldn't look him in the eye. But she was dying to know what he was thinking. I spent $830 today, and for some poor woman who needed it more than me. Carlos stopped in his tracks, looked at her, and replied, Debbie, listen up. You can do what you want and buy what you want. What's mine is yours. We're married. No need to be so skittish. If Carlos had seen what was going on inside, he would have dealt with things in his own way. But Debbie would still be the good guy. He wouldn't have let the couple leave hating her. Debbie's heart felt warm when she heard what Carlos said. Whether it was because of the part of you can do what you want, or we're married. No need to be so skittish around me. She wasn't sure. When she was with Hayden, she had always been careful around him and his family. Debbie raised her head to look at him. As usual, his face was calm and expressionless, like still water. How could such a cool and distant-looking man be so gentle? Debbie stood on tiptoe to kiss him on the cheek. Thank you, she said happily. Her tender kiss made Carlos' heart sing with joy. With a smile, he took her hand and made his way to the parking lot. I haven't seen Emmett lately. How is he? Debbie suddenly asked after they had gotten in the car. Carlos looked at her and answered, He's working in another city. Debbie didn't sense anything strange, so she simply nodded. The next morning, she received a phone call from Jared. Hey Tomboy, remember that job offer my friend hooked you up with? I told him don't bother. What? Why? You don't need a job.
Yeah, Ido.
Call your friend and tell him you were kidding. Oh, come on. You're Mrs. Hua. Why do you even need a job? Married to Carlos, Debbie had everything, not to mention more money than she could ever spend. And she still wanted to work. Jared wondered if there was something wrong with Debbie's head. Actually, Debbie felt bad about spending Carlos' money. She thought if she had a job, maybe she wouldn't feel as helpless. What kind of job is it? I want it back. Discover your next adventure at Sigma Nu Epsilon Iota Eta. You're looking for a part-time job, right? About the only thing we have is a barista. You'd probably have to really like coffee. Still want it? Hold that thought. I need to call your hubby and make sure it's okay. It's not your call anymore. Don't call him. He's uber busy. You really think it's a good idea to bug him? I want that job. Okay. Jared replied grudgingly. A few days went by, and Debbie got the job. But her second day on the job was less than ideal. The store manager called Jared and told him that Debbie had hit a customer. But Debbie was indignant. She thought the man deserved it. He's a piece of crap, cheating on his wife with 2 other women. She spat. She was unrelenting. She insisted on working. And it fell upon Jared to find her another job. This time the position was a sales associate in a supermarket. However, within 3 days, Debbie was fired from that job as well. The manager didn't take kindly to the bruises she left on his face. Who knew? He had it coming. He's a bully. Again, she didn't think she did anything wrong, but she was hell-bent and determined to work. And Jared was on the verge of having a nervous breakdown. Then one day, Christina said to Debbie, Deb, why don't you sing with me in the bar? You have a wonderful singing voice. I know the barflies will love you, and if anyone can bring the moolah in, it's you. Okay, why not? Debbie agreed. While the girls cheered excitedly, Jared was worried to death. As much as he wanted Debbie to have a job, he thought it was a lousy idea to let her work in a bar, considering that she already hit someone in both the supermarket and the cafe. It was not hard to predict what was going to happen to have Debbie working in a place as chaotic as a bar. But Jared might catch a break this time. He was a little more easygoing when he realized that one of his friends was a regular. He could go with him and watch over Debbie. Debbie had a problem. She had to attend Carlos' lessons every evening. so she couldn't sing in the bar every night. Of course, Jared came up with a solution. He told the manager that Debbie didn't have to work in the bar every day. She could come there when she could and be paid by the hour. Intimidated by Jared's status, the manager agreed. Since Carlos was so busy, sometimes he would have to cancel the lesson, like tonight. Earlier, he texted Debbie, saying he couldn't make it tonight. Debbie was glad that she could go to the bar and make some money. The first 2 nights, Jared stayed in the bar to keep an eye on her. Some men confessed their love for Debbie, but except for that, nobody dared harass her. On the 3rd night, Debbie won everyone's heart with Love Paradise. For half an hour, the DJ used the widescreen in the bar to display the declaration of his love for Debbie. "Be my girlfriend, Debbie. I love you," he shouted passionately through the microphone. Then the customers clamored excitedly. "I'm married. I have a husband," Debbie told the DJ. But since she wasn't wearing a wedding ring, nobody believed her. At length, she was able to pick up the mic, wait for the background music to start, and start singing once more. Once she started singing, "Pray for You," a man in the VIP area on the 2nd floor sprang up from the sofa with a glass of liquor sloshing in his hand. The girl hadn't noticed, just singing beautifully, hypnotizing the throng with her siren-like voice. Standing by the French window, Carlos squinted at her gloomily. When did she start here? Why wasn't I told? He wouldn't have even come to such a place if he didn't have to deal with something important there that night. Blissfully unaware that Carlos was watching her from above, Debbie continued singing. "I pray your birthday comes and nobody calls. I pray you are flying high when your engine stalls." Debbie had sung this song to Carlos before, a cover of Jaron Lowenstein. He hadn't known Debbie was in the bar until he hears the song. He caught sight of the love declaration on the screen. Instantly his face darkened and he stiffened, looking like a living ice sculpture. When the song was finished, the customers started screaming and whistling in excitement. At that moment, someone came over to Carlos and reminded him he was there to sign contract, so he walked away from the window. And that was when it all hit the fan. After Debbie had stepped down from the stage, a man poured a glass of liquor. He held the liquor in one hand and walked towards her with a wad of notes in his other hand. "Come on, chica. Down this glass of liquor and these notes are all yours." Debbie glanced at the notes. There were less than 2,000 there. For a glass of liquor. She thought it wasn't worth it, so she turned him down. She could make as much in 1 hour just by singing, and singing didn't harm her body, yet drinking did. Besides, alcohol is murder on the vocal cords. She wanted to be able to sing well, so she said no. The contempt in her eyes made the man feel like doggy-doo. Humiliated and irritated, he took out a thicker wad of notes and tossed it on the table. "Drink," he demanded. Now, there was a respectable amount. She grabbed the cash and the glass. Without a word or any hesitation, she put the glass to her lips and downed it. The man was pleased, and with a sinister sneer, he poured a second glass. Everyone started cheering when Debbie emptied the second glass. Christina was singing when she saw what was happening to Debbie. She was worried about her. Then she remembered Jared was there too. But when she turned her head, she couldn't see any trace of him. He'd been making time with a girl, though, so it was possible they left together. So it was up to her to keep a bad situation from getting worse. After Debbie had downed 3 glasses of liquor, she'd earned more than $10,000. Jared finally revealed himself. He was tipsy and staggered out of the bathroom, slumping back into his seat. Since there was a throng surrounding Debbie at that moment, Jared couldn't see her. So he turned his attention to the girl he had met earlier. By the time Christina found him, Debbie had already drunk 7 glasses of liquor. She let him know, and the news sobered him. Jared rushed to Debbie, snatched the glass from her hand, and snarled, "What the hell do you think you're doing? How much have you had?" Noticing the thick wad of notes, Jared shivered. "If Mr. Hua finds out about this, I'm screwed." Debbie waved her hand and said, Relax. Look at the money I've made. Thousands of dollars a glass. And I'm not drunk yet. She really could hold her liquor. After 7 glasses, her face was red, but she was only a bit tipsy. She was in a good mood now. She figured she could drink more and make more money. The man in the bar poured another glass of liquor for her. Once again, she emptied the glass and took the wad of notes thrown on the table. Her husband Carlos was rich and generous, but she considered it wise to have some private savings, just in case she and Carlos got divorced one day. She didn't want to end up homeless and penniless after the divorce, and she figured she'd found her calling. Seeing that Debbie wouldn't listen to him, Jared cleared his throat and shouted at the man, "Go away! Do you have any clue who she is? You have some serious stones to get her drunk like this. You're playing with fire." Jared wasn't a regular. As a matter of fact, it was no short drive for him to get here. The only reason he was here was Debbie, so the man didn't know either of them. Jared's words didn't faze the man. He just shrugged and assumed an innocent tone. "You saw it. I didn't force her. She wanted to drink." It frustrated Jared that what the man had said was true. He wanted to punch the man in the face, but he lacked a reason. Then he whispered in Debbie's ear, "Think about your husband. You forget what he did to us the last time we got drunk? And that was just beer. But you've put a lot of glasses away. What do you think he's going to do when he finds out?" The thought of her husband made Debbie tremble. "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier?" she complained and belched. At that moment, 2 men walked over and grabbed Jared's arms. "Are you blind? Bernard's having fun. Boss is rich enough to buy this whole damn bar, let alone a few drinks. Now, get lost." With that, one of the 2 men gave Jared a rough shove. Provoked, he grabbed an empty bottle from the table and smashed it against the table. "I don't care who the hell Bernard is. Go ahead. Make her drink again. I'll kill you," he spat, pointing the remaining broken bottle at them. The manager of the bar freaked out. He signaled the bodyguards and said to Jared apologetically, "I'm sorry, Mr. Hahn, but I wouldn't dare to offend the person seated upstairs even if I had 10 lives to gamble with. I'm afraid you will have to let Miss Nguyen go." Receiving the signal, the bodyguards walked towards Jared and tried to force Debbie away from him. Jared wasn't as good at martial arts as Debbie was. Moreover, Debbie was drunk. Desperate to find a way to protect Debbie, he shouted as the bodyguards approached, "I'm going to find out who the hell this man is." With that, he held Debbie's hand and began climbing the stairs. The others made way for them. When he got to the private booth upstairs, Jared kicked the door open and yelled, "Who the hell is stopping my Friday? Mr. Hua." One single sight of Carlos' face, Jared almost fell to his knees out of fright. He spun around to look at the drunk person behind him, darted outside the room, and slammed the door shut hastily. "Tomboy, run. Run for your life. It is Carlos Hua inside," he whispered in a trembling voice as his fingers shivered to find balance. By this point, Debbie was too drunk to stand straight, but Jared's last remark alerted her. She stared at Jared with gaping eyes and nodded. Then, hand in hand, they dashed downstairs like a crazy couple running to save their lives. Carlos had recognized who were outside when the door of the room had been kicked open. Also, he noticed that Debbie wasn't fully standing erect, indicating that she was drunk. He opened the door and stepped outside the booth. "Stop them," he ordered in the hallway. Unaware of the cause, the manager quickly followed Carlos' orders and told the bodyguards to stop the 2 people running away. "Move! Move!" Having grabbed her by the wrist, Jared led the way for Debbie. However, the bar was so crowded Debbie couldn't run fast, although her physique enabled her to. As soon as they reached downstairs, they were barred by the bodyguards. But she hadn't forgotten to resist. She knocked down the first bodyguard that tried to lay his hand on her, and then the second, and then the third. When she was going to handle the 7th, the bar suddenly became eerily quiet. Debbie had an ominous feeling when a chill crept up her spine. Jared, who was standing opposite Debbie, saw the man behind her, his face twisted with fear. Should I flee for my life? Debbie is his wife. Maybe he wouldn't harm her even if I left her alone here. After knocking the last bodyguard to the ground, Debbie pretended not to sense the person standing behind her and strode towards the entrance of the bar. "Stop!" came the cold command in a stern voice. Upon hearing Carlos' voice, Debbie felt her limbs go numb. The other customers all stepped back from the scene, mostly because they all wanted to keep a safe distance from Carlos, the man with an intimidating presence. "What should we do?" Debbie whispered to Jared, who was standing beside her. "I wish I knew," Jared wailed inwardly. "How about I run and you go appease your husband? You're his wife after all. I suppose he won't be too hard on you." "No way. Are you ditching me?" Debbie pinched his arm hard. Jared let out a painful scream and jumped in agony with one hand covering the pinched spot. "Debbie Nien, this man is your husband. He will let you pass after you play cute and sweet. Trust me, men are the same. I'm a man and I know it. Play cute and sweet? Me? Kill me right now." Debbie cursed internally. She felt that this would be the most difficult thing she ever had to do. While they were whispering, Carlos came down the stairs. "Hurry, your husband is arriving. Our lives depend on you now, buddy," Jared told Debbie, tugging at her sleeve, nervous as ever. Debbie closed her eyes. "Okay, I'll do it. For my friend and myself. Just this once. It shouldn't be too difficult." After calming herself down, she raised her head and turned around abruptly. She threw herself at Carlos, buried her face in his chest and said, "Mr. Handsome, I feel so dizzy. Who am I? Why am I here? What is this place?" The onlookers all watched in shock. "Ah, is this playing cute or dumb?" Jared cried inside, feeling his end was near. "What's happening?" Carlos wondered. The thick stench of alcohol from Debbie made him wince in disgust. He shot a grim glance at Jared, who almost lowered his head to the floor, and demanded, "What's going on? Why is she like this?" Jared didn't dare to lie to Carlos. He looked up and was going to tell him about Bernard, but when he looked around, he noticed that Bernard was long gone. "Shit," Jared cursed.
Noting.
"Tomboy just drank a little. Right, Tomboy?" Jared stressed on her name as a cue for her to respond something. Carlos' name completely cleared Debbie's head. Afraid of what he'd do, she put the money in her purse and was ready to leave the bar. However, Bernard grabbed her arm. "Since you took so much of my money, don't you think you owe me a song? Maybe next time." "I'm too drunk to sing." Debbie grinned and took a step forward. "What's your hurry? If you're drunk, then sing drunk." Bernard was not happy. Sensing Bernard wasn't going to let her go, Jared smashed the broken bottle against his head. Blood gushed out and flowed down his face. Some of the customers screamed and fled the place, afraid of what might come next. Bernard touched his head and soon his hand was covered with blood. His eyes went bloodshot with rage. He kicked away the chair in front of him furiously and yelled, "Asshole! You'll pay for that. I work for Oscar. You're so dead. Oscar," Jared repeated with a sneer. Debbie felt the name sounded familiar, but she didn't remember where she had heard it. "Yes, Oscar's my boss. You want to save your ass? Beat it. She took my money and she belongs to me tonight." Assuming that Jared was scared by the name Oscar, Bernard got cocky. Jared didn't get angry. On the contrary, he calmed down rather quickly. He patted Bernard on the shoulder, pointed his thumb at Debbie, and said to him, "Oscar was beaten to a pulp and sentenced to life in prison. Know why? He offended her. That what you want?" Everyone in the underworld knew that Oscar was beaten up at Orchid Private Club and thrown out half dead. People said it was because he pissed off Damon. Soon enough, he was given a life sentence. Bernard cast a weird, suspicious look at Debbie, who was a little tipsy. So she's Damon's woman. Thinking of the tens of thousands he had spent on the drinks tonight, he felt humiliated and furious if it was all for nothing. You can go. I want my money, he said shamelessly. Debbie hadn't expected the man to be so cheap. She put her hands on her hips and retorted, "Why should I? I drank so much liquor. At your request. I earned every penny. If you couldn't afford to lose it, why did you give it to me in the first place?" The man's suspicion thickened at her words. "You said she's Damon's woman. Would Damon's woman care about a tiny amount like that?" Bernard knew that Damon was Carlos' good buddy. All Carlos' friends were rich and powerful, so he was pretty sure that the woman wasn't Damon's woman. "I never said she was Damon's woman. That was all you," Jared said impatiently. Then he turned to Debbie. "Ignore him, tomboy. Let's go." Jared took her by the arm and started to walk towards the entrance of the bar. Finding out that Debbie wasn't Damon's woman, Bernard was relieved. Also, since she was just a nobody, he was more reluctant to let her leave with his money. "You!" At that point, the manager came over. He was obviously unnerved and sweating. When he saw Debbie, he frowned and said, "What are you doing here? Hurry. A big shot upstairs wants you to sing." "I don't want to." Debbie refused crisply. She felt dizzy and just wanted to go home. The manager was anxious. The person upstairs was too important to anger. "Duhi. How about I raise your pay by 5,000? 5,000? Who's so important that he's willing to put so much cash?" You look up cheap in the dictionary and the manager's face is there. Debbie couldn't help but wonder. She wouldn't sing even if you paid her $10,000 an hour. She needs to go home. Jared shouted angrily. Carlos would kill him if he found out Debbie had gotten so drunk. He must get her back before Carlos got home so she could take a shower and go to bed. If she were to sleep, Carlos wouldn't bother her. The manager knew Jared as a rich kid. Although he wasn't as important as the man upstairs, the manager didn't dare to offend him either. "Mr. Hahn, to be honest, even your brother wouldn't dare to mess with the guy upstairs. I think you better let her sing," he explained to Jared politely. Few people could make the manager so afraid. Bernard looked at him and thought the person upstairs must be pretty important. Who is his brother? And who is the person upstairs? He asked, pointing at Jared. His brother is Damon and the name of the person upstairs is confidential. The manager answered impatiently. Learning that Jared was Damon's brother, Bernard instantly shut up. For a moment, he couldn't feel his legs anymore. The money was forgotten and his head even didn't hurt so much anymore all of a sudden. All he could think of was running as fast as he could. In fact, Jared didn't know Damon well. There were a lot of people that his brother wouldn't dare to offend. Therefore, he didn't think this was such a big deal. "I don't care who is upstairs. I intend to get her out of here. Move away." At that moment, he had forgotten that there was one person who made him care Carlos. Later, when Jared saw the person upstairs, he wished he could take back what he had just said. Debbie's eyelids were getting heavy. The liquor had a strong delayed effect. It was starting to go to her head. If they stayed any longer, she might pass out. Taking the hint, Debbie nodded immediately and said, Yes, alas, my head is spinning so fast. Mr. Handsome, can you take me home?" Carlos didn't expose her trick. His face was as gloomy as ever. When he carried the woman in his arms, the crowd exclaimed in shock. "Who is that woman?" one man asked. "Who knows? Why is Mr. Hu carrying her?" Another responded. When he passed by Jared, Carlos kicked him in the shin and said, "How dare you to let her drink so much? And on your watch." Jared howled in pain and blurted, "I couldn't stop her." And then came another kick, this one more excruciating than the previous one. "Ouch! I'll stop talking. Just stop kicking. Gosh, it hurts." While Jared was jabbering, Carlos gave him a stern look and he shut up so quickly as if there were an off button on his mouth which had just been pressed. "Damn it!" Jared cursed in his heart. He had never been in such a humiliating situation. The entire set of onlookers stared at him with pity. When Carlos was carrying her out of the bar, Debbie slightly raised her head from Carlos' shoulder and mouthed, "Sorry," to Jared. The boy snorted and turned his head away. He didn't seem to care anymore. "It's all because of her. I told her not to drink. Ow, my leg. Ow, my groin. Damn hurts. Even my old man has never kicked me this hard. Carlos, if I ever get a chance to hold you in the palm of my hand, I'll make you grovel and call me grandpa. Mind you. Ha ha ha. That would be fantastic." As Jared was immersed in his fantasy, Carlos suddenly turned and looked at him suspiciously. The smirk on the boy's face disappeared instantly, and he ran away like a deer escaping a lion in one piece. Tristan had been waiting for Carlos by the car outside the bar all the while. When he saw him coming out of the bar with a woman in his arms, he was surprised. But after a careful stare, he opened the door of the back seat respectfully. Debbie started pretending to be asleep the moment she was carried into the car, but after a while, she actually dozed off. The car got filled with the stink of liquor. It didn't take a genius to figure out how much Debbie had drunk. Debbie was so deep asleep she didn't even realize when they arrived at the villa. Suddenly, she was frozen to her core. She woke up to find herself in the tub and cold water was being sprayed on her body. She shuddered. "Carlos, this is so uncalled for," she shouted angrily. "Awake!" Carlos tried to contain his anger with great difficulty. Debbie wiped the remaining drops of water off her face. When she opened her eyes, she noticed that there were tens of dollars scattered on the floor. She felt disgusted seeing hard-earned money being dumped. Carlos might not care, but she did. She stood up and walked out of the tub in her drenched clothes. It might not be a lot of money, but it meant something to her, especially considering the murderous glares Carlos had been shooting at her repeatedly. It wouldn't be exaggerated to say that she had earned that money with her life. Watching her pick up the notes one by one, Carlos didn't stop her. When she was done, he said, "Go get changed." "We're going somewhere." Debbie tried to deduce something from the man's face, but frustrated at his poker face, she had to nod. When she got dressed and walked out of her bedroom, Carlos was already waiting downstairs. Once she hoped in, the car drove away from the house slowly. Debbie was fidgety. When she looked out the window, the memories from the last time when Carlos had taken her to the Martyrs Park all came flooding back. "Where are we going?" she asked warily. "Shinning International Plaza." Debbie was relieved to hear that soothing response. But why was he taking her there at this late hour? The car finally came to a halt. Debbie staggered out and followed Carlos into the elevator. Only after the elevator has stopped on the top floor did she realize what his real intentions were. A haven for bookworms and dreamers. Boo-hoo. "Carlos Mr. Handsome, I'm sorry. I made a mistake." Debbie held on to a holding bar near the elevator and cried, refusing to take another step forward. Carlos ignored her pleas and dragged her into the cinema nonchalantly. The moment they were inside, the cinema was bustling with moviegoers, but the manager received Carlos as soon as he appeared at the entrance and ushered them towards the biggest theater. When the manager left, Debbie held Carlos by the waist and pleaded again. "Mr. Handsome, I realize that I was wrong and I won't do it again. Please, can we go now? It's creepy to watch horror movies at night. It may kill me. Let's go home. Please, please." Carlos was unmoved and still acted indifferent. After dragging her to the center of the theater, he made her sit next to him. The movie started soon. A scene of a dark graveyard first came into view. It made Debbie's blood run cold. "Carlos, I have apologized. Why are you still doing this? I won't drink again. Okay? Can you just forgive me? Please?" Unleashing imagination, one read at a time. Debbie shifted her eyes away from the screen to Carlos. But the sound effects of the movie made her heartbeat quicken. She covered her ears tightly with her hands. For a while, it helped, but soon her hands and wrists went sore. Phobia and horror were driving her crazy. She had begged and pleaded, but the man seemed heartless to ignore her. "Carlos, You are a freak. I'm fed up with you. I will divorce you. I will. Let's go get a divorce now. She lost her temper. Sit well, the man said after giving her a cold glance. Debbie stood up defiantly from her seat and tried to shut out the horrible sounds. If you want to stay, fine. Stay. I'm leaving. She threw the 8D glasses far enough out of sheer anger. I hate him. I hate his evil guts. I'll divorce him no matter what, Debbie thought as she stormed towards the exit of the theater. To her dismay, the door was locked from outside. She slammed the door anxiously for a long while, but no one came to her rescue. Frustrated, she stomped angrily on the floor, covered her ears, closed her eyes, and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Carlos, you asshole! Let me out! Let me out now!" She yelled and cursed. However, all her efforts were futile, as if none of her words came across. Carlos remained nonchalant, sitting there, eyes on the screen. Finally, Debbie had enough and started crying. "I want to get out. I don't want to be here." Who? I said, "I am sorry." "Why are you so mean?" He had taken her to a cemetery one evening and scared the life out of her. Now he was forcing her to watch a horror movie in the middle of the night. She hated him with all her soul. Before she knew it, Carlos was already standing in front of her. "Will you ever drink again?" he asked the sobbing girl who sat on the floor. As long as she could get out of the cinema, for now she would just say whatever he wanted to hear. "No, I won't. I promise, not ever," she replied, while what she actually thought was, "Carlos Huar is a son of a bitch. Will you get yourself into trouble again?" "No, never again. If I get a chance, I'll have Carlos Huar's guts for garters. Go to study overseas next year." This time, no response. "Go or not?" "Okay, I'll go." Then the door was opened soon. Carlos and Debbie walked out of the theater one after the other. Back at the villa, Debbie, without turning back, ran to her bedroom and slammed the door shut behind her. She threw herself onto the bed and cried. When she got tired from crying, she took out her phone and clicked on the moments on WeChat and posted an update. "God damn it. It's torture when someone takes advantage of your weaknesses. I'll get my revenge sooner or later." That night, she didn't intend to sleep. After a refreshing bath, she called Jared and whined about Carlos over the phone for an hour. Jared was so tired of hearing it he almost fell asleep. "I'm going on a trip tomorrow." Finally, she changed the subject. She had promised Carlos she would stay out of trouble, but she didn't say that she would stop skipping classes. "Where to?" "H country. Are you going with me?" Jared shook his head.
No.
"Maybe Casey will go with you." He and Debbie had traveled together many times. He was kind of sick of it. "Okay, go to sleep then. If you don't see me at school tomorrow, it means I have gone to H country. Don't mention a word to Carlos Hua." "Who is the old man you referred to?" Hayden asked as he was surprised by Debbie's response when she answered his call. "Dive into stories. Embrace enchantment." "Never mind. I was referring to no one in particular," Debbie replied casually. "What made you call?" "I've been in Y City for a couple of days now. I have no plans tonight, so I'm thinking maybe we can have dinner together." "Oh, sorry. I'm out of town. I'm on a trip." Hayden hadn't expected her response. For a moment, he was in a daze but soon realized that Debbie was such a travel gal. He remembered how much she enjoyed going to places. She had visited different tourist destinations, more than he ever had. He envied her determination and her free spirit. "Oh, I see. It's okay. Anyways, my schedule will be cleared out early next month. How about I take you to England for a vacation then?" "No thanks." Debbie turned him down immediately. "I've been busy lately. I have all these different classes every day. I had to make time for this trip." Debbie was telling the truth. When her trip was over, she would once again be occupied with dance, yoga, English, and other classes. "Debbie, don't lie to me. I know you. You always hate studying. You're just trying to blow me off by making up those classes." "No, I'm not. That's the old me. People change. Now I have yoga, dance, English, advanced mathematics, and so on, but I don't learn martial arts anymore. For a moment, there was only silence at the other end of the line. You used to say you will never quit martial arts. My mom and I once asked you to quit, but you refused. Why now? Hayden knew how much she used to hate those classes she just mentioned. Debbie smiled and said, "Because I don't have to protect you anymore." One of the reasons why she had worked hard on martial arts was to protect Hayden and his sister, Forecd, who was frail like a willow leaf. Debbie and Hayden started dating when she was 16, and their relationship lasted for 2 years. Just a few days before her 18th birthday, for some unknown reasons, they broke up. During those 2 years, being his girlfriend, Debbie was the one who had protected Hayden and his sister, although she herself was a little girl. In return for her bravery, she got ridiculed by Hayden himself. "You are not womanly at all," Hayden had said to her. Debbie's reply on the phone made his heart tighten.
I'm sorry, Deb.
"I didn't treat you well before. I didn't treasure what we had. I've regretted it. I've missed you for the past 3 years. Can we start over?" Hayden apologized, his voice full of remorse. He had been involved with dozens of women after Debbie had left him, but none of them truly loved him as Debbie had. She was so thoughtful in a way that, even though she didn't know how to cook to make sure he ate well, she used to bring takeouts to his workplace. Moreover, she changed her character for him. She was perky, but when she learned that Hayden's mom liked quiet girls, she had always reminded herself to be quiet in front of his mom, just to get her approval. On ordinary days, because Hayden's family was wealthy, he got kidnapped or blackmailed a lot, or sometimes into some other kinds of trouble. All those times, Debbie tried her best to protect him, no matter how dangerous the situation was. She used to get drunk easily, but every time Hayden had to drink at a dinner party, she drank his alcohol for him, just because drinking was bad for his health and she wanted him to stay healthy. Thus, at first she could only handle 50 grams of alcohol, but gradually, she could handle more than 1 kilogram of alcohol. She had done so many things for him. But now it was over. Hayden had lost her, that girl who had loved him like a fool. Now he was back, and he wanted her back. He promised himself that he would never let her go this time. "Hayden, it's too late." Every time Debbie mentioned his name, it hurt. She was the one who gave and gave in their relationship, but in the end, all she got was a broken heart. It still pained her when she reminisced about their past, but she was over him now. She had moved on. Except for the pain, she didn't have other feelings for him. Debbie's last remark made Jared nervous. "You are going on a trip and you're keeping it from Carlos, what? Are you looking for trouble? It doesn't matter anymore. I am going to get a divorce when I come back. I can't stand that jerk anymore." Sleep didn't come to Debbie until the wee hours of the night. However, when Debbie felt drowsy and was about to fall asleep, a knock on the door alerted her. Cold sweats dripped from her forehead as she was totally frightened. She snapped her eyes open and asked, "Who is it?" Her voice was trembling. "Open the door." It was Carlos. Debbie bit her lips and didn't answer. When no response came from inside, Carlos knocked again and demanded, "Open the door."
No.
"Look outside the window. There's a—" He was cut short and wasn't able to finish his sentence because Debbie already rushed to the door and opened it. Seeing her red eyes, Carlos realized that she had been crying. He felt bad about it but said nothing. He walked past her and lay in her bed. "What are you doing?" she asked angrily. "Sleeping," he simply replied. "Get out." For the first time in his entire life, someone told Carlos to leave. He didn't say anything, nor did he leave. Before he came to her bedroom, he had been pretending to be asleep and waiting her Debbie to come to his bedroom. After what had happened in the cinema, he had thought Debbie would be so frightened as to come to his bedroom and climb into his bed again. He had waited for more than an hour, but she didn't come, so he had to come to her bedroom instead. Thinking about it, he felt it was childish and lame for him to pretend to be asleep in his room. "Come and sleep," he said, but Debbie didn't move, and he wouldn't get out of her bed. They had reached a deadlock. Carlos ran out of patience. He got up, strode towards her, carried her to the bed, and tucked her in. She struggled and punched him. "If you move again, I'll get rough," he warned. That worked. Debbie became quiet instantly, lying in bed with her back to Carlos. "Carlos, you brazen, lewd, despicable old man." She kept cursing in her head and slowly drifted into sleep. The next morning, when she woke up, Carlos was gone. She packed her things and got ready to leave. It was such a sudden decision Casey wasn't prepared. She was occupied with some family matter and couldn't go with her. At last, Debbie went to the airport alone. The busy streets of Y City were filled with people going to and fro, minding their own private businesses. Debbie waited patiently for her flight bound for J City. It was a long and tiring flight. Getting off the plane, she hailed a taxi and found the hotel she had booked online. The moment she tucked her bag inside the closet, she changed into a white casual outfit, put on sneakers, took her purse, and went outside to have some fun. She treated herself to a share of stuffed tofu with spicy sauce and strolled along holding her food in her hands. When she spotted an interesting widget in a shop by the street, she stopped to appreciate it. As she was taking a bite of the tofu, her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, swallowed the tofu in her mouth, and hung up. It was Carlos. She wouldn't take his call. However, he seemed quite persistent. Her phone rang again and again and again. Every time she hung up, he would call again. When her phone rang for the 12th time, she picked it up immediately and said, "Old man, enough already. Is your company going out of business or something? Don't you have work to do? Why do you keep calling me? It's annoying." "Deb, it's me." The strange yet familiar voice sent her freezing on the spot. Debbie looked at her phone screen to check the number. It was indeed not Carlos. It was Hayden who was calling her this time. "Oh, what's up?" Her tone softened. She threw the tofu box into the bin, wiped her mouth dry, and listened to him attentively. Debbie ended the phone call and continued roaming the streets as if nothing had happened. When she passed by a dessert bar, the delicate desserts in the glass cupboards drew her attention. There was cake, icy pudding, and multi-layer steamed bread. Durian flavor was her favorite. She remembered how Hayden hated it. Every time Debbie ate a durian snack in front of him, he would say it smelled disgusting and that she would get fat from eating too many snacks. He had even told her not to eat durian snacks in his presence. Out of nowhere, Debbie suddenly recalled that night when she was with Carlos. She could tell that Carlos hated durian's smell too, but he had eaten the snack with her even though he despised it. She knew by the look on his face that he was just forcing himself to eat the durian snack. Carlos had specifically ordered crispy durian cakes and durian pancakes for Debbie the other day when they were eating on the 5th floor of Alioth building. Maybe it was because he was several years older than Debbie. Carlos was thoughtful in many things. He would ask Julie to make durian dishes or desserts at the villa now and then. When Debbie sneaked into Carlos' room for the first time, he had caught her immediately. After that, she had tried to sneak into his room again, but he never busted her. To think about it, Debbie thought maybe it was not that he didn't know that she was sneaking in. Maybe he had let her in on purpose. Ever since she was young, Debbie was afraid of thunder and lightning. She had come to Forecd's bedroom in the middle of the night before when she and Hayden were still dating. It was on Hayden's birthday. It was too late when the party was over, so Debbie stayed in Hayden's house. When she was sleeping alone in the guest room that night, suddenly thunder roared and lightning flashed. She was too scared to sleep, but she couldn't go to Hayden's room. That would be inappropriate. So she knocked on the door of Forecd's room and told her that she was afraid to sleep alone. To her dismay, however, Forecd pushed her out of her room impatiently and locked the door. "Don't interrupt my sleep again," she had warned her. She remembered how scared she was that night. She had to bear with the thunder and lightning and sleep alone while covered with 3 layers of blankets. Recalling all this, all of a sudden, Debbie missed Carlos, that overbearing, arrogant, hateful man. Debbie stared at her phone screen. There was one missed call from Carlos. She made up her mind that if he called again, she would pick up the phone. 2 days had passed. Carlos still didn't call. On the third day, Debbie had a big dinner that evening. She had eaten so much that after dinner, she rubbed her stuffed belly and decided to stroll down the streets to hasten the digestion of the food. Then she came across an emerald store. She walked in and looked around. In the dim light, a lucky piece buckle caught her eyes. "I'd like to have a look at that one," she said to the bald, fat storekeeper. "Sure. Miss, all the pieces in our store are genuine. This lucky piece buckle is exquisitely polished." The keeper grinned. "How much is it?" $28,000. "A good price." Debbie's eyes widened. That was way too pricey for a lucky piece buckle. She knew a little about emerald. To appraise its quality, she looked at the buckle against the light and found that it was not transparent at all. It definitely wasn't worth $28,000. So Debbie put the lucky piece buckle back and said, "I'll look at some more." Seeing her turn around, the storekeeper put on a hideous look on his face and snapped, "How can you not buy it after you looked at it?" Debbie was confused. "What do you mean? Do I have to buy it after I looked at it? Why, I don't like it. Of course, I won't buy it." She thought the storekeeper was being ridiculous. The storekeeper hit the table hard with his fat hand and announced, "Why did you look at it if you didn't intend to buy it? You must buy it. How can you force your customers to buy things they don't want?" Debbie stopped to observe the circumstances of the store. For sinister-looking men were playing mahjong seated around a square table near the entrance of the store. Hearing the conversation between the storekeeper and Debbie, they turned around and gave Debbie an ominous look. "I'm forcing you to buy it. So what? Give me the money." $28,000. Not a penny less. From the way Debbie dressed, the bald man could tell that she was rich, and he was going to rip her off before he let her leave. Debbie wanted to leave the store as soon as she could, so she ignored the storekeeper and turned around to walk towards the door. However, the storekeeper grabbed a remote and locked the automatic door. "You can't leave without buying it." Debbie's blood was up. "He keeps pushing me. This pig is looking for trouble." She darted towards the bald man and clutched his collar. "Open the damn door," she warned angrily. Hearing the commotion, the 4 men who were at the table stopped playing mahjong and stood up from their seats. With quick strides, they surrounded Debbie. The 4 of them looked sternly at her like dogs fighting over some bones. Sigma Nu Epsilon Iota Eta, a haven for bookworms and dreamers. Debbie was left with no choice. She had to fight her way out. She knocked the storekeeper to the ground and sent him howling. She cracked her neck and was prepared to strike her next target. By now, the other 4 men could see that she was not an easy one to handle. One of them whipped out his phone and called someone. "There's a chick who knows kung fu. Send Herb and Ron over." Hearing that more foes were coming, Debbie planned to run away. She let go of the man she was grabbing, took an opportunity, and ran to the back of the store. She looked desperately for a back door, but there was no back door. It was a bedroom that she recklessly ran into. When she realized where she was, she wanted to run out, but the door of the room was locked then by those men. "Stay there. You can come out when you have decided to pay the money," a man said outside. Debbie took her phone out of her pocket and wanted to call the police. Then another man's voice called out, "Call the police if you want. Nobody dares to mess with us, not even the police. I'm letting you keep your phone because I'm not worried about you calling the police." She didn't buy it and called the police anyway. The police told her that they were on their way and would be there soon, but no one came even an hour later. So these jerks were not joking when they said that the police didn't mess with them. Debbie muttered to herself in a hushed voice. A minute or 2 passed, and the men outside eventually lost their patience. They opened the door. 2 odd-looking, bulky men who were more than 2 meters tall walked in and stood in front of her. One of them was chewing a betel nut. "Beach, give me your perth," the betel nut yelled. But his pronunciation was so bad that Debbie couldn't make out what he had just said. "Huh? What kind of language is that? What is he barking? It took her a long moment to figure out that he was asking for her purse. Fumbling around her backpack, she took out her purse and handed it to the beetle nut. Here you go. See? I'm very poor. It was not that I didn't want that lucky piece buckle. The truth is that I couldn't afford it. I only have $300. Go on. You can open my purse and see it for yourself. The beetle nut sneered. Who are you kidding? Open your mobile payment app and give me your phone. Although he talks as if he had two tongues fighting, he isn't stupid after all. Debbie thought to herself. She clutched her phone tightly. It was her only hope. She would never give it up to them. Then an idea struck her. She clicked the contacts button on her phone and tried desperately to intimidate her captors. I have a very powerful background. The people I know will kick your asses if you dare hurt me. However, the beetle nut didn't seem frightened at all. Call whoever you want. I will wait and see who will come. If one person comes, we make $28. 000. If two come, we make, it's $56. 000. If two people come, you make $56. 000, prompted Debbie. It was hard for her to watch the man being tortured by math. Nonetheless, she found it silly and hid a wicked smile. Gosh, I thought I was bad at math. She scrolled the call log back and forth, while her eyes wandered around the room. She was looking for an escape route. She had no intention of calling anyone, but her finger accidentally touched Hayden's number. When she realized it, the phone had already been connected. The call was soon answered, but what he said was really disappointing. Deb, an important conference is about to commence. Do you have something urgent to say? If you don't, then I have to go. Somehow, Debbie wanted to see how he would react when he knew what was happening to her. Yes, I do. Hayden, some people are trying to... To what? He didn't even wait to hear her out. Deb, the conference has begun. I have to go. I'll have my secretary call you back later. Okay? Actually, Hayden indeed had a meeting, but it hadn't begun yet when Debbie called. He had lied because he was angry at Debbie hanging up on him earlier, so he ended her call in a hurry. It never occurred to him that since she had called at this really late hour, something awful might have happened to her. The two men in the room grew more impatient. When the call ended, they snatched away Debbie's phone and said, I don't believe that you don't have money on your phone or in your card. Come. I'll swipe your card and you'll input the code. Then they searched out from her purse the card Carlos had given her. It was a premium gold edition Visa card. Before they could swipe it, Debbie's phone rang again. The caller ID said, Old man. Her hopes were renewed. After being disappointed in Hayden, she started expecting rescue from Carlos. I have to take that call. The two men refused. Hell with the call. Hurry and input the code now, the other man demanded. The man holding her phone ended the call with one slight push. Debbie was provoked and didn't want to play games with them anymore. Why should I throw away $28? 000. There's only one way to find out whether it will work or not. I guess I'll just have to try. As soon as they were out of the room, Debbie took several steps back and charged towards one of the men. She jumped onto the man's back, strangled him with her right arm, and kicked him in the back of his knee. The man sank to his knees painfully. The beetle nut stretched himself a little and then swung his fist towards Debbie. Debbie blocked his arm with her leg, caused her excruciating pain. The man on his knees stretched out his right leg to give her a sweep. Busy with handling the beetle nut, Debbie failed to see the other man's leg coming. She fell hard on her back. She got to her feet wincing, straightened her clothes, jumped in the air stretching her legs, and gave the two men both a hard kick in the chest. Then, with the support of a table, she jumped up and swung her fist towards the beetle nut's eye. Nonetheless, she missed. The beetle nut grabbed her by the wrist and twisted her arm behind her back. He then slapped Debbie across the face. When he was about to kick her, there was a knock, rather a pound, on the door of the store. The storekeeper, who was sitting in a chair while smoking, signaled the beetle nut to keep the girl out of sight. He obediently dragged Debbie towards the bedroom, holding her with a tight clench. When the door was opened, a dozen fierce-looking men were standing outside the store. The head of them glimpsed the fallen chairs and broken showcases. His face darkened. The storekeeper was overwhelmed and scared at the sight of such men at his store, especially by their leader, whose presence was as intimidating as a demon's. In J City, few people were as distinguished as this man. "How can I help you?" the storekeeper asked politely with a smile. Nobody responded. The man in charge walked into the store haughtily in his brand-new leather shoes. The GPS on Debbie's phone showed that she was here at this store. "Where is she?" Carlos took out his phone and dialed Debbie's number again. Just as he had expected, her phone was heard ringing in the bedroom. Right now, Debbie's mouth was covered. Through the gap in the door, she could see Carlos outside the room. She was so excited that she wanted to scream, but all she could make were grunts. The beetle nut was covering her mouth so tight that she couldn't even breath. Her phone was still ringing on the floor. When she saw the caller ID old man on his screen, she almost cried with joy. He had come. For her. Carlos glanced at the storekeeper, walked to the door of the bedroom at a steady pace, and kicked it open. What he saw inside the room made his heart tighten into a knot. His face purpled in rage. The girl was held on the floor by two men. Her clothes were a mess. Her face was pressed against the floor, her mouth covered. Her hands had been twisted behind her back. "Smash the damn door," Carlos said to Tristan ruthlessly. "Yes, Mr. Hua." Tristan motioned to the men behind him, and a dozen men came forward and started smashing everything in their sight. The storekeeper wailed and begged in tears, but who cared? Who would question Carlos' command? The door of the store remained closed all the while. Therefore, although some people heard the noise inside, they didn't know exactly what happened. Hence, there weren't any strangers to witness the happenings. While his men were busy smashing the store, Carlos took Debbie out of there. He and Debbie walked in a lane hand in hand, both keeping their mouths shut as though to not disturb the eerily silent atmosphere around them. She was thinking that since Carlos had found her, he must also know where she stayed. For obvious reasons, she then realized that they were heading for her hotel. "Old man," she called. Carlos didn't respond, nor did he look back. He didn't seem to care. "Carlos Hua." Silence. "Mr. Hua." Still no response. The silence seemed deafening. Not wanting to be ignored any longer, Debbie trotted ahead of him and blocked his way. He shot a cold glance at her, but remained silent. "Mr. Handsome, thank you for saving me tonight," she said politely. Carlos released her hand, took off his suit jacket, and draped it over her dirty white casual jacket. The gesture gave her a lot of confidence standing beside him. While she still seemed to fidget, he picked her up, carried her in his arms, and walked on. Never had a man treated her this way. He treated her as if she were the most precious thing in his life. "Old man, shut up." His growl made her lose all the courage she had to continue with what she was trying to say. He sounded really pissed. When they reached her room, Carlos looked around. "Not as bad as I thought. At least she got herself a room facing the lake." He put her down, locked the door, and next, stripping her? Stunned, Debbie held his hand and asked, "W, what are you doing?" "You," he answered curtly. For a moment, she fell into a deep pit of confusion. When she realized what he literally meant, her face flamed with embarrassment. "This perverted pig," she cursed in her heart. "No, don't. Old man, I apologize.
I'm sorry.
What I did was wrong. Don't be mad, okay?" she said. Carlos continued to strip off her jacket, as if he couldn't hear her. Debbie clutched her clothes tightly, but then he lifted her jacket up. "Carlos, be a gentleman. How can you be such a jerk? Get your hands off me." Continuing to ignore her, he turned her around with her back to him. When he was sure that there was no injury, he finally put her jacket down and straightened her clothes for her. By now, she realized that his man had no ill-gained intentions in his mind. Then he started to take off her pants. "I am not injured," she said hurriedly. Carlos was relieved. After a glance at her, he asked, "Debbie Nien, how are we going to settle this?" When she saw his face, her anger vanished into thin air because she had done something wrong. "I know I was wrong, so please don't be mad," she pleaded, holding his hand with a fawning smile, in a soft voice. As a tomboy, that was the best she could do to play cute. Actually, even that was killing her. However, the man didn't seem to appreciate her efforts. He stayed nonchalant and didn't believe a word she had just said. Debbie felt utterly frustrated. Desperate to prove her sincerity, she raised her right hand and vowed, "I meant every word I just said. I'm really grateful for what you did for me today, and I promise I'll listen to you after we go back." Carlos suddenly pulled her into his arms. Debbie's heart pounded nervously. She didn't even know how to react to such a situation. "Don't ever travel alone again," he demanded. She nodded in a fluster. Is he worried about me?" she wondered. But she had doubts. "Carlos, why are you here?" She finally mustered up enough courage to ask the crucial question that was troubling her throughout the day. At the same time, part of her hoped that his answer would be, "I'm here for you." "I was just passing by," he replied casually. She refused to believe a word he had just said. Thinking that he had come here for her, Debbie wrapped her arms around his neck happily, stood on tiptoe, and kissed him on the cheek affectionately. "Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for letting me rely on you," she reflected. At this moment, Debbie felt that Carlos was much more reliable and trustworthy than other men around her, such as Jared and Hayden. Hayden had admitted quite bluntly that he still loved her. Despite that, he wasn't there when she needed his help. However, when she kissed Carlos on the cheek, he gently pushed her away, walked to the nightstand and dialed the receptionist's number. "This is room 1206. We need a med kit." "Thank you." Before he got a definite positive response, he hung up the phone hastily. Debbie was startled. Really? That's how he usually asks people to do him a favor? "I don't think he's going to get that med kit anytime soon," she thought to herself. However, within 3 minutes, the doorbell rang. Debbie ran to open the door and saw an employee of the hotel standing outside with a med kit in her hands. "Thank you so much." She thanked her politely and took over the kit. "You're welcome, miss. Sigma Nu Epsilon Iota Eta, a haven for bookworms and dreamers." After closing the door behind her, Debbie walked up to Carlos and gave him the kit. He opened it, took out some Q-tips and a bottle of antiseptic solution before leading Debbie to a chair. "See, I'll clean your wound," he offered gently. "Really? Have you been trained in treating wounds?" she asked in utter disbelief. He rolled his eyes and answered coldly, "I've served in the Special Force before. Cleaning wounds is a piece of cake to me. It's one of the most necessary skills we must learn." "You've really served in the army before?" she exclaimed. Last time, she could tell from his standing position that he must have been trained for combat before. But she didn't expect him to have served in the Special Force. Her thoughts ran wild. "Then why did you quit the army and become a CEO? Did you not like serving in the army?" she asked in confusion. She really wished to see him in the military uniform. He'd be so handsome in it. "It's a long story. I'll narrate it to you some other time." He unscrewed the lid, dipped a Q-tip into the solution, and began to clean her wound gently. A sharp intake of breath was heard. It was a kind of cheap solution and gave her wound a stinging sensation. She surely seemed to be in excruciating pain. Every time he cleaned the wound with the Q-tip, she winced in pain. But still, she was much stronger than other girls in resisting pain. Other girls would have already cried in pain if they were in Debbie's shoes. Carlos paused upon hearing her intake of breath. He was used to this kind of solution, but he forgot that Debbie was a girl and the pain might seem unbearable to her. His face softened as he said, "Sorry, I forgot to remind you that the solution might sting. I'll be quick. Just hold on." Then he continued to clean her wound again. "It's okay. I can handle it." If Casey and Christina were here, they would lecture Debbie about the way she acted before Carlos earlier. Other girls would certainly pretend that it was very painful and even shed tears to draw his attention. Debbie, however, acted bravely. She pretended as if it didn't hurt at all, and stubbornly refused to let him know the intensity of pain she was facing. She fixed her eyes upon the man who was focused on cleaning her wound. After a while, she couldn't resist her urge and asked, "Carlos why did you come to me today?" Ignoring her question, he took out a Band-Aid and was about to apply it over her wound. "I don't want to have a Band-Aid on my face," she refused. "It would look rather weird with a Band-Aid on my face," she thought. It was just a tiny wound. Carlos turned her down without any hesitation. "I insist on it. You can remove it tomorrow morning if you want." "Fine. Why did you avoid my question?" Carlos put everything back into the med kit and answered casually, "I'm your husband. It is pretty normal for me to be available for you when you need me." She was effectively rendered speechless. "Can't he be a bit amiable to me?" she wondered. She lowered her head and remained quiet for a while. Obviously, she was disappointed right now. Carlos, however, didn't realize that. Even if he did, he remained indifferent to it. He ordered, "Go to the bathroom and take a shower. It's late and we need to get some sleep. We'll be flying back home tomorrow morning." "But I thought we were going to spend a few more days here," she retorted quickly. Carlos didn't really understand why she still wanted to stay in the city where she had been robbed mercilessly. He knew it would be futile to argue with her on this matter, so he pulled her into his arms and threatened, "Are you sure you want to disobey me?" His hands were running wildly throughout her body. Debbie blushed. She struggled to set herself free and swiftly dashed towards the bathroom. "I'm going to take a bath now." The way Debbie was being treated made Carlos' blood boil. He walked over grimly like a soul slayer and, before the two robust men could realize it, he sent one of them sprawling onto the floor and kicked the other one to the side of the shabby bed. Carlos helped Debbie sit up and held her in his arms. Her hair was all messed up. He gently brushed the disheveled hair out of her eyes and asked in a whisper, "Are you okay?" There were some scratches on her face. Worried that it might hurt, he didn't touch her face and just blew some dust off it. With teardrops flowing down her cheeks, Debbie nodded to convey to him that she was okay. Carlos kept her at a safe distance from the two fallen men, and then he walked back to them. He hauled one man up, twisted one of his arms behind his back, and then with one snap, dislocated the man's arm. The man yelled miserably in pain. While Debbie was exercising her wrists, the other man's arm got broken by virtue of Carlos' actions. She was impressed when she saw Carlos take down the two sturdy men so quickly with his own bare hands. Seeing his rage, Debbie started to worry whether Carlos would kill them. Those men cried and yelled as if they were pigs being taken to an abattoir. After a long while that seemed like a century to the men, Carlos finally decided to rest his arms and attend Debbie. He relaxed his wrists, helped Debbie up, and carried her out of the room. When they came outside, the storekeeper was waiting for Carlos, on his knees. Obviously, he had realized that he had made a huge mistake by messing with the wrong person. "What happened?" Carlos asked Debbie coldly. Debbie was surprised at the question. Since Carlos had beaten the two men up without saying anything, she had assumed that he would never bother to ask the cause of the matter. Did he lose his rationality because of me? That thought crossed her mind, but only for a second. She pointed at the lucky piece buckle on the showcase and said, "They forced me to buy that lucky piece buckle and wouldn't let me leave unless I gave them the money." Carlos glanced at the lucky piece buckle and didn't utter a word. Debbie continued, "They asked for $28,000, but it wasn't worth that much. Of course I wouldn't buy it. Then they locked me up in that room. They also snatched away my purse and wanted to swipe my bank card. I'm sorry, your card. With only one glance, Carlos knew that the lucky peace buckle was fake. It wasn't even worth $100, let alone $28,000. And the worst part was that they had tried to coerce his wife into buying it. Carlos let go of Debbie's hand, walked over to the showcase, and kicked it so hard that the entire showcase crumbled into pieces. The fake emerald items displayed inside the showcase got dismantled in a second. Debbie was startled because she had never seen him burning with rage ever before. She had seen so many sides of him tonight. After spending almost an hour in the bathroom, Debbie finally reappeared and saw Carlos working on his laptop. Her phone rang at this moment. She walked to the nightstand, picked up the phone and saw the caller ID. Hesitantly, she moved to the balcony and answered the call. Hello. Her voice seemed nothing louder than a whisper. Deb, what happened? I was in a meeting. It just got over now. Hayden's voice came from the other end of the line. Gazing at the lake not far away, she sighed inwardly and answered in a cold voice. Nothing. Mind your own business. Deb, when are you coming back to Y-City? I'll pick you up at the airport when you arrive. No need for that, Hayden Goo. And don't you dare call me from now on. I'm married. I don't want my husband to misunderstand our relationship. We better stay away from each other. After a long pause, Hayden giggled and said, Deb, I know you are lying to me. You are only 21. How can you get married this early? I know you are mad at me because... Before he could finish his sentence, he heard a man's voice come from the other end. Deb. Debbie turned stiff upon hearing Charles's voice and wondered whether he had heard their entire conversation. She had promised Carlos before that she would not send messages to Hayden again. Deb, who's that man? Why are you with him at this late hour? Hayden's voice was far from anything that could be described as calm. Debbie's heart skipped a beat when she saw Carlos' furious face. She blurted, He's my husband. It's very late now. My husband and I need to go to bed. Bye. Before Hayden could reply, she hung up the phone. Staring at her phone, Debbie didn't know how to explain it to Carlos. She smoothed her hair to calm herself down and murmured, Carlos, don't get me wrong. Without saying a word, Carlos turned around and walked into the bedroom. She had no other choice but to follow him. I really have no relationship with him anymore. You have to trust me, Mr. Handsome. She felt awful after being misunderstood by him. Carlos turned and looked at her with deep eyes. How can I trust you? After all this, her cheeks were red out of anxiety. She put her phone aside, held his waist with both arms and kissed him on the lips. After a while, she raised her head and asked in a whisper, Do you trust me now? Since she took the initiative to kiss him, he didn't turn her down. Instead, he wanted more of it. He held her tightly, lowered his head and kissed her right on her lips, passionately. His lips were demanding and firm when they molded hers. He was kissing her with both tenderness and need. He threw her onto the king-sized bed. Then he leaned down and kissed her lips again. I want to bite this lips. He murmured against her mouth, and carefully he tugged at it with his teeth. She moaned spontaneously and he smiled, out of satisfaction. Early the next morning, a man walked out of the hotel, followed by a girl. Both of them seemed to have long faces. His face was livid, whereas the girl looked frustrated. They were none other than Carlos and Debbie. Tristan, carrying Debbie's suitcase, tagged along with them and didn't dare to utter a word. He could sense the intense struggle between his boss and his boss wife. Do they end up having a fight again? No, I don't think so. Or did the tension stem from Mr. Hua's dislike towards the room? Did he not get enough sleep? Tristan's rally of thoughts marched on endlessly. He had suggested a 5-star hotel to Carlos, but the latter had rejected him up front. He really felt confused, but he decided to keep his nose out of Carlos' private affairs. He didn't want to lament about not having done it later on. Upon arriving at the VIP lounge of the airport, Debbie sat opposite Carlos and cast a ferocious glance at him. She cursed, "You are an insensitive, unthoughtful male chauvinist." Carlos took a sip of his coffee and cast a cold glance at the girl in front of him. He regretted not sleeping with her last night. A wide smirk flickered at the corners of his mouth as he watched her anger grow. "You're disappointed because I didn't make love to you, huh?" The cocky manner of his question made Debbie choke on her drink. After some pause, she snapped, cheeks flushing red, "Save me that balderdash. I've never seen an insensitive jackass like you." With a sincere heart, Carlos put his cup back on the table, leaned toward Debbie and said in a low, sensual voice, "I'm sorry I didn't satisfy you last night. It won't happen again. I'll let you be the captain of your boat tonight. You can shag all you want." I blew it. She only wanted to be on top, which is not a big deal. I should have agreed, he thought to himself. He sat upright and added, "Well, I'll let you explore when we roll in the hay tonight. Fill that house with screams of pleasure till morning." Debbie's face flushed even more at his needless lewd details. The shameless bastard doesn't even mind that his assistant is still here, she cursed to herself. With her head down, she retorted in a low voice, "Stop dreaming. I'm not sleeping with you. I'll spend the night in the dorm." Carlos, however, tapped on the table with his fingers and stated, "Since we're a couple, it's time for you to move into my bedroom now. You need to get used to your identity as my wife. Forget about it. I'm moving back to my dorm on the campus. Already, Casey and my roommates are missing me, while I'm here wasting time with you." Putting on a serious face, Carlos nodded and said, "Got it. Thank you for reminding me." Just when Debbie heaved a sigh of relief and thought he had agreed with her, he continued, "Thank you for reminding me that we're still sleeping in separate bedrooms. I know I shouldn't have neglected you for all the 3 years we have been married. From now on, all that will change. Whatever you prefer, I'll comply, for the sake of love." So far, he had already given her plenty of time, and he believed it was time for him to take her for a wife. The more time they spent with each other, the more he understood her. If he kept waiting until she was ready to give him children, he might watch with envy while Damon and Wesley send their own to school. Sometimes he was a real pain in the butt. Tired of his bull-headed persistence, Debbie leaned over the table and reprimanded, "Stop giving me that bull crap. Let's talk about something else." "All right, there's a birthday party you should be attending tomorrow evening," he announced. "A birthday party? Whose birthday party?" she asked in obvious surprise. Acting laconic, Carlos picked up the iPad on the table, powered it on, and placed it in front of Debbie. There was a photo beside a short bio of the birthday girl, Megan Lawn, who was turning 18. That was it. There was no more information. Is he taking me to the party? Does that mean Carlos doesn't take the girl or her birthday party seriously? Debbie wondered, but she chose to keep her mouth shut. When they came back to Y City and arrived at the villa, Debbie received Casey's call. They chatted on the phone cheerfully, Debbie opening up on how Carlos had come to rescue her. And then, in order to thank him, you gave yourself to him. After some pause, Debbie answered, "No." Finally, she had someone she could open up to and vent out her frustration. "You know what, Carlos Hua is such an insensitive male chauvinist. Can you believe it? I thought we would make love last night. After great foreplay with lots of kissing and touching, I was ready to give myself to him. But you know what, the bastard started an argument just at the moment when I thought I was ready for him. I've never seen such an unreasonable, arrogant man." "What happened?" Casey asked with genuine concern. From nowhere, he mentioned something that I didn't like. To me, it was a small matter, but apparently he's an implacable man and he wouldn't budge. I was so frustrated. The night almost ended in a fight. Not that I'm absolutely free of blame, but I think Carlos needs to work on his ego. At this rate, he might end up thinking a wife is supposed to be a mindless bootlicker. But Casey knew Debbie too was stubborn. If Carlos indeed offended her, it would take quite a deal of pleading and coaxing to change her mind. However, Carlos himself was a proud man, and their relationship had been a stormy one for a long time. Neither of them wanted to back down whenever they disagreed. The unromantic details left Casey in worry. After a long pause, she finally calmed herself down and said, "Deb, we are girls, and tenderness is our strongest weapon. Power has gotten into your husband's head, and he thinks he's in control of your love as well. You need to act nice, instead of arguing with him. Haven't I been a little too nice already?" Debbie rolled her eyes and complained, "Fine, I'll give it a try if you say so. How do I go about it? Anyway, okay, listen carefully." Taking a moment to clear her throat, Casey said with affected tenderness, "First, you need to apologize. Whether you were the cause of the argument or not, you need to take the first step. Waiting for Carlos to apologize first is almost impossible, at least judging from what I know about him. Once you've made peace, it would be good to start off on a high. That's the best time for you guys to bang." "Wait, bang? Are you kidding me?" It gave Debbie goosebumps to imagine Casey's brazenness.
Smon débit quasi coaxé.
"Are you some cave woman? Use Google search if you didn't get what I said, sweetie. It's not that I didn't get what you meant. It's the titillating way you put it that makes me doubt you." "Geez, you make me flinch, Casey Zhang," exclaimed Debbie, feeling uneasy at her friend's direct manner. "Take it easy, girl. It's your love life I'm trying to save," Casey replied. "Thank goodness in me you have a shrink and a good friend who won't sit on the fence and watch you and Carlos destroy your marriage," she added with a satisfied giggle. Both Casey and Debbie knew each other well. They had been best friends for a long time. Banking on that friendship, Casey urged, "You know countless women in this world want to marry Carlos. Right now, you have the best chance to win his heart. Otherwise, you'll lose him. Anyway, you are a smart girl. I believe you'll hack what it takes to make him your man. Remember that time when you argued with Gail over that collar pin? You acted like a spoiled girl before Mr. Hua, and he bought it. But I'm not one of those women. You're just an idiot. Fuck off," Debbie shouted. Casey cleared her throat and said with a smile, "I was just kidding. Don't get mad at me, girl. You need to take care of your husband and satisfy his needs. Don't lie to yourself that you're the only woman he could ever find in the whole world. You should count yourself lucky and fight to keep him by any means. If you lose him, then you'll wake up to what I'm trying to drive into your head, darling." "Don't worry, I won't," Debbie said indifferently. Actually, what she meant was that she wouldn't regret if she lost Carlos to another woman. But on second thought, she hated to think about such possibility. Dive into stories, embrace enchantment. It was almost 8 p.m. when she hung up the phone. Time for her lessons, where Carlos was taking her through advanced mathematics. But instead of preparing for class, Debbie rolled on her bed, dwelling on what Casey had said. "If I start sleeping with Carlos, will it be possible that he won't force me to have so many classes?" She took out her phone and posted in her WeChat moments, "I have a dream, and it is to sleep with CH. If he let me down, I'll ask him to kneel on a washboard. If he lets me down, I'll ask him to kneel on durian shells. Ha ha ha." Next, she opened the Weibo app and posted, "Carlos, why don't you sleep with me?" Christina had added Debbie as her close friend on Weibo, and she was able to read her post soon. Upon seeing Debbie's post, Christina commented, "Do you dare to mention Carlos, Hua? That takes nerves." Already, Debbie has switched off her phone and left for Carlos' class. Little did she know that her posts had become a buzz. Many of her friends who saw the post in WeChat moments took the conversation to group chats. In one of the groups, Casey mentioned Debbie and commented, "Tomboy, I felt shame for you. You've been married to Carlos for 3 years, but you are still a virgin. Do you have a problem? Or is it your husband who is the problem?" Debbie felt frustrated at Casey's message. "I don't have a problem, and I don't think Carlos is the problem," she retorted in her mind. Quickly, She typed in the group's chat, "He and I are not that close yet, and I still need time. Dive into stories, embrace enchantment." To which Christina chimed in, "Debbie, I'm really curious. Who is on top? You or he?" A clueless Debbie couldn't find a good response, so she pretended to ignore Christina, but deep inside, a lot of questions were running through her mind. Not to make her clumsiness obvious, she clicked on the emoji for anger and sent it. After a moment's thought, she added, "Casey, withdraw your previous messages. Don't forget we have 2 boys in the group." Promptly, Casey sent an emoji showing a speechless expression and withdrew her previous messages. Following suit, Debbie and Christina also quickly withdrew their comments. By the time Dixon and Jared saw the group's chat, they only saw a thread of several withdrawn messages. But Debbie's problems were far from over, as her Weibo account had been flooded with comments and messages. The moment she opened her Weibo app, her phone buzzed nonstop with incoming messages like a switchboard. When she checked at the end of notification tones, there was a total of more than 99 unread messages. What did I post on Weibo to attract all the incoming chats? She wondered to herself. Coming to her senses, she remembered her hurried post, which she had forgotten about when the group chats exploded. The bad part was that a good number of people on the thread had copied Christina's comments. "Do you dare mention Carlos, what?" As if this was not enough, some people even mentioned Carlos in the comments. Another popular person on the thread was Jared, whose comment had racked up hundreds of likes. "Time waits for no men. Just do it." A stranger commented, "In the sky the clouds float. It is Carlos' dick that I want." This comment had the most likes on the thread. Debbie felt annoyed when others showed great interest in her husband. Triggered by the comment, she deleted it without hesitation. While she was chatting with Carlos admirers on Weibo, she got a text message from Carlos saying, "I need to work overtime tonight, so there will be no class this evening. Just stay at home and wait for me. And don't sing in the bar." The conversation on Weibo was too engaging for Debbie to begin arguing with Carlos. Playing along, she simply typed, "Yes, Mr. Handsome," and sent the message. Upon reading her reply, Carlos curled his lips with a sense of satisfaction, though he wondered why she hadn't put up a protest, like her usual self. Growing suspicious, he opened the WeChat moments and bumped into her trending post. At around 11 p.m., after a yawn, Debbie opened her WeChat moments and saw a comment left by a stranger with the pseudonym C. "Believe me, it's not a dream," read the laconic comment. Confused, Debbie opened C's moments and there was only one post on financial news. Who was this C? Without giving much thought to C's identity, she closed the WeChat app and began to chat with the girls on Weibo again. Testing the waters, she made sure to throw in a negative word here and there about Carlos, just to see how the girls reacted. And sure enough, they would attack her immediately, often with epithets and zeal. "The guy has quite some fanatical followers," she thought to herself, envious of her husband. Time passed, but Carlos still didn't come back. She dozed off and dropped her phone on the bed. The next morning, she woke up before daybreak and was about to get out of bed to pee. To her surprise, she found Carlos sleeping beside her, his right hand thrown across her waist. Without stopping to think, she got out of bed and walked towards the toilet. When she came back, he was still fast asleep. Too sleepy to think, she also slid between the sheets, closed her eyes again. As she was drifting off, Carlos snuggled closer, crossing his arms over her, a little higher than he previously held her. Without opening her eyes, she turned to face him, made herself comfortable in his embrace and went out like a light. Little did she know that Carlos' eyes were wide open. He looked at her, rubbed his arching brows and tried his best to ignore his erection. At the time, Debbie was dreaming, having a nightmare to be more exact. In the dream, Carlos kissed her on the lips. Then, he kissed her neck, her chest. Then Gail popped in her dream. Jolted by the strange dream, she sat up only to realize strangely, that she was naked and her pajamas were on the floor. But without stopping to think, she put on her pajamas and ran down the stairs. In the dining room, Carlos, who was eating his breakfast, asked her indifferently, "What are you doing?" Ignoring his question, Debbie gasped for air and blurted out, "Carlos, I know you don't care if I divorce you. You've already thought of marrying Gail Moo instead. But trust me, that bitch will screw your life." That was a bombshell. After what seemed like an eternity, Carlos looked away from the hickeys on her neck and asked in confusion, "Who is Gail Moo? Why would I divorce you? And why am I going to marry that bitch?" Somehow, the word bitch coming out from Carlos' lips amused Debbie. Then she realized that it was just a dream. In her dream, Gail married Carlos. At their wedding, she ground Debbie beneath her heel and mocked her mercilessly. Debbie scratched her hair in embarrassment and murmured, "Nothing. Continue with your breakfast. I need to go back to sleep." Before she could turn around, Carlos stopped her by saying, "Freshen up and have breakfast. The stylists will be here soon." "This early?" she asked in disbelief. The party would start in the evening, so she thought the stylists would come here in the afternoon. "Aha!" He lowered his head and continued to eat his breakfast. Seeing he was not speaking, Debbie turned around and walked up the stairs to wash her face and brush her teeth. After that, she got into the cloakroom to get dressed. However, what she saw in the mirror made her scream. By instinct, she stepped back from the mirror without even realizing it. When she sobered up, she moved closer once more and checked herself carefully. There were many love bites and her hair was roughed in a way that meant only one thing. Instantly, she realized that it was not a dream. Carlos kissed her all over and even undressed her. Just how he had gone, she couldn't tell. "Yang, this old scoundrel. People will think we had wild sex last night when they see me like this. How am I supposed to step out like this? I don't want to wear a scarf," she cursed inwardly. The stylist arrived at the villa soon. They had brought a cosmetic case and a collection of dresses, as well as high heels and bags to match the dresses. Since it was a birthday party, an evening dress was not necessary. Carlos himself chose two from the dresses, one beige, the other ice blue. He gave them to Debbie saying, "Try them on." Debbie went upstairs with the dresses in her arms. 10 minutes later, the girl showing at the staircase made Carlos' eyes light up. Despite wearing no makeup, she looked incredibly angelic. The ice blue dress left just enough of her long legs and fair skin, which definitely got Carlos' attention. She had also tried the beige dress on, but the ice blue one looked better. She put on a white wind coat and went down the stairs. With a bright smile, she stopped before Carlos, her face blushing at the intense gaze. "How do I look?" she asked with a hopeful expression. Without answering her question, he looked away and ordered the servants, "Hang the rest of the clothes in the cloakroom." "Yes, Mr. Hua." "Are these dresses all mine?" Debbie wondered in awe. Tugging at his sleeve, she said, "Carlos, I don't think I need so many dresses. It would be winter in about a month, and she didn't think she had the chance to wear these dresses before winter. There is no harm in hanging them there." Debbie was left speechless. "The evil capitalist," she mused. Carlos selected a pair of high heels and some accessories for Debbie. Now all that was left to do was put on the makeup. He looked at Debbie's bare face and turned to one of the stylists. "Light makeup." "Yes, Mr. Hua." When the stylist was about to rouge her lips, Debbie stopped her, excused herself and ran up the stairs. After a while, she came back carrying a delicate box. She opened the box carefully, treating it as if it had her most precious belongings. "May I use my own lipstick?" she asked with a hopeful smile. Inside the box were dozens of lipsticks of different brands and colors. The stylist was a bit surprised by her request, but then nodded. "Sure, why not?" Debbie beamed and selected a pink one from the box. Carlos walked up to her and picked up the box casually. He stared curiously at the lipsticks and asked, "I thought you disliked wearing makeup." Why do you have so many lipsticks? Debbie answered indifferently, It's true that I don't like wearing too much makeup, but that doesn't mean I can't have a few lipsticks. As he put the box back on the dressing table, Carlos immediately remembered what had happened in the shining International Plaza last time. Olga had snatched a lipstick set from Debbie, and instead of siding with his wife, he had bought the set for Olga and even threatened to throw Debbie out of the mall. Sigma Nu Epsilon Iota, a haven for bookworms and dreamers. Oh my God, what have I done? Debbie must have felt so wronged back then. Carlos realized the mistake he had made and wanted to make amends for the past. Debbie was discussing the texture of the lipstick with the stylist. Little did she know what Carlos was thinking about. Once she was done, she jumped off her chair and ran towards him. She gave him a sweet smile and asked, "Do I look good now?" He was lost in his past memories and was somewhat absent-minded. Staring at her with blank eyes, he nodded without saying a word. Debbie pouted, disappointed by his lack of enthusiasm. She thought Carlos would be stunned by her beauty, but he remained unaffected. She put the lipstick into her purse because she might have to fix her makeup later. The box was taken back safely to her bedroom. When they reached their destination, Debbie finally understood why she had to get up so early that morning. It was already noon by the time she was done with her makeup. After lunch, they arrived at the harbor. There, they boarded a ship, and after traveling further into the sea, they had to take a helicopter. When they reached the island, it was already dark. I really don't understand these rich guys. Why do they feel the necessity to hold a party on such a remote island? Debbie had thought to herself on her way to the island. But when she arrived, she soon understood why. While in the helicopter, Debbie looked down at the island and the ocean surrounding it. The green island looked like a giant emerald, adorning the blue ocean. Putting the European-style villas and the classic decoration aside, the colorful flowers, the clean beaches, and the blue ocean formed a beautiful landscape. The island was covered by tropical trees and flowers. The temperature here was above 20 degrees throughout the year. After she quickly climbed out of the helicopter, Carlos helped Debbie take off her wind coat and handed it to the butler standing next to them. Debbie stretched her arms to loosen up her sore muscles and smoothed her hair lightly. All of a sudden, she felt Carlos' warm breath on her ear as he whispered, "You should wear dresses more often. You look great today." Debbie blushed scarlet at his unexpected compliment. She feigned anger and complained, "I asked you whether I looked good in the villa, and you walked away without answering me. I thought I didn't look good." Carlos handed his coat and waistcoat to the butler. He looked handsome in his white shirt. Walking closer to her, he swiftly pulled her into his arms and kissed her on her lips, without minding the people around them. "You are the most beautiful girl I've ever seen," he said, releasing her from the kiss. Debbie's face turned tomato red instantly, mostly because of his compliment, but also because the butler was still standing behind them. She gripped his shirt with one hand and pushed him away with the other. "Don't, people are watching us," she murmured. Carlos flashed a sly smile and continued to tease her. "Are you saying that it's okay to do this when we are alone?" Words left Debbie as she stared into his hungry eyes. She stood on tiptoe and kissed him on his cheek once. "Will you let me go now?" she asked with a shy smile. Carlos was amused, almost shocked by her quick peck on his cheek. He thought it was adorable and was reluctant to let her go now. He held her tighter and said, "No." Debbie pouted her lips, ready to retort, but Carlos added, "I'll let you go for now, but when we reach home later, wait for me in my bed." Debbie didn't know whether to cry or laugh. She was safe for now, but she was a little worried about what would happen in the evening. "Debbie!" A man's voice brought her back to her senses. She turned to see who it was. From not too far away, a couple was approaching them, arm in arm. Colleen was wearing a long yellow dress and her partner was Curtis. He stared at Carlos and Debbie in confusion. "Why are you two here together?" he asked. Debbie was also surprised to see Curtis and his girlfriend there. Mr. Liu, Colleen, how are you doing? She greeted them. As she said her hellos to them, she pushed Carlos aside to keep him at arm's length. This made Carlos' face turn sour. Colleen gave Debbie a friendly smile and said, "We're doing great. Debbie, the last time I saw you and Carlos, you were not on good terms with each other. Since when did you two become so close? Is there a story you want to share with me?" Curtis was as curious as his girlfriend to know that. Debbie was too embarrassed to answer her question. She lowered her head, staring at her shoes, not knowing what to say. When she failed to respond, Carlos reached out to pull her into his arms and said nonchalantly, "She's my wife. Of course, we are close to each other." Carlos remembered that Curtis has a soft spot for Debbie. He cast a challenging glance at Curtis. Although Carlos didn't know about the nature of the relationship between Debbie and Curtis, he decided to keep her away from Curtis anyway. "She is my wife, and I will be the one to take care of her from here onward," he swore to himself. Curtis and Colleen were held speechless by Carlos' declaration. They both stood stunned, not knowing how to react. Shock was written all over their faces. Even Curtis, who always kept his calm, was at a loss for words. As Carlos' friend, Curtis knew that he had gotten married 3 years ago, but he didn't know that his wife was Debbie. So, Carlos' wife is Curtis thought. "Debbie, come here for a minute," Curtis said, waving at her. He had kept a secret from Debbie and hadn't planned on telling her now, but it looked like it was time to let her know. If Debbie were someone else's wife, Curtis wouldn't have been worried about her. He knew that she was not the one to be bullied easily, but she was with Carlos. Curtis knew his buddy well, and he was actually worried about Debbie now. Debbie began to walk towards Curtis, but Carlos grabbed her right hand tightly and pulled her back. He said in a low growl, "Honey, you are a married woman. When another man waves at you and asks you to go with him, you should turn him down. Understand?" Everyone was rendered speechless, and Curtis raised his eyebrows in surprise. They wondered why Carlos was so jealous and possessive all of a sudden. Debbie, whose face had become red again, said in a whisper, "Then you come with me." She didn't want to turn Curtis down impolitely. After all, he had treated her well in the past. "Fine. Next time if someone asks you to go with them anywhere, just call me and I'll come with you." Debbie looked intensely at Carlos' face, trying to figure out whether he was joking, but it looked like he really meant it. Colleen chimed in, "Hey Carlos, Curtis only wants to have a word with Debbie. Why do you have to show off your affection in front of us? Are you even the same cool Mr. President anymore?" Arm in arm, Carlos and Debbie sauntered forward to stand in front of Curtis and Colleen. Grinning like a possum eating persimmon, Carlos enthused to Colleen, "When Curtis proposed to you before us, you two showed off your affection for each other as well. We were so jealous of you back then." At the mention of the loving memories, Colleen smiled so broadly that her round eyes were reduced to slits. Curtis smiled as well. Then they looked each other in the eye, eyes full of affection. The couple seemed devoted to each other, something that Debbie greatly admired. The envy on her face didn't escape Carlos' notice. He held her hand tighter. "Debbie Nien, from this day onwards, I, Carlos Hua, will not have you admiring anyone else." Carlos swore to himself. Before any of them could speak, a young man's voice came from behind their backs. "Hey, Mr. Hua and Mr. Liu. I've heard a lot about you too." Turning around, Debbie saw 2 men, one in a black suit and the other in white, walking toward them. It was Jared's brother, the guy in white who had called. Debbie knew who he was, but they were not acquaintances. The man in black looked familiar to Debbie. She remembered she had seen him once on TV, and he was a colonel or something. In real life, he looks much more handsome than on TV, Debbie thought, letting her eyes settle upon the man's face. She was really surprised to see them here. Who was this Megan Lawn? Why did the 4 richest young men in Y City all appear at her birthday party? When he noticed his wife was drooling over another man, Carlos' face soured. At once he pulled her into his arms and announced in a cold voice, "This is my wife, Debbie Nyen." The announcement caught Wesley off guard. Among the four of them, he was the youngest, and this being a big bash, he had probably come prepared to mingle. The first in the group of four to have a girlfriend was Curtis. His girlfriend, Colleen, was 28 years old, 2 years older than Wesley. But Debbie, if his memory wasn't lying, was only a college student and was only 21 years old. Still single at 26, Wesley felt dejected to know that someone 5 years younger was in a stable relationship. Reluctantly, he stepped forward to stand before Debbie and made a military salute. "Nice to meet you, Debbie."
I'm Wesley Lee.
Although he was in a suit, it didn't look weird when he made the salute. In fact, he looked quite charming. The man's loud and clear voice startled Debbie, but she immediately regained her composure and returned a not-so-standard salute. "Nice to meet you, Officer Lee.
I'm Debbie Nyen.
I've practiced martial arts for years. I'd like to challenge you when you're free someday." However, Wesley's face changed dramatically at her words. Some years back, he remembered a girl of Debbie's age standing before him and cheerily saying, "Nice to meet you, Officer Lee. I'm your new neighbor. I may have to trouble you in the future." Somehow, he realized that Debbie resembled the girl when she smiled. Sadly, the girl got engaged to another man, shortly after Wesley had fallen in love with her. Debbie was not a soldier and her arm went numb for maintaining the salute posture for 2 minutes. However, Wesley remained staring at her, without a word. The atmosphere became really weird, but Debbie didn't know what was wrong. The next moment, Carlos pulled her behind his back to stop Wesley from looking at her. His face turned sullen. "She's not her," he told Wesley. "Your escape into infinite tales." Why did Carlos say that? She wondered, but she noticed Wesley came back to his senses instantly. He withdrew his hand, stepped back and adjusted his suit. To smooth things over, Damon reached his arm to hold Wesley's shoulder and offered, "Let's get going. Megan must be looking forward to seeing us." Feeling uncomfortable, Wesley threw Damon's hand off. "Why would you stick close to another man when there are so many good girls around here?" He sternly reprimanded Damon. Debbie couldn't help laughing out loud at Wesley's words. "Is it so funny?" asked Carlos, rolling his eyes. "They're interesting guys," she replied. "Sucks to be me," said Damon dejectedly. "There are so many pretty girls in the world, and he thinks I like hanging around with him? I guess he went mad because he stayed in the army without seeing a woman for so long. He must have thought I had a thing for him," he said to Debbie with a teasing smile. Damon and Jared were actually brothers who resembled each other very much in character. Meeting Damon, Debbie felt close to him as if she were seeing Jared instead. "Yes, I know you obviously would have a thing for him. You and Jared are both playboys and have dated countless women." Damon's mouth gaped. Smoothing his blonde hair, he murmured, "Really? I'm a playboy in your eyes? Fine. A playboy is much better than a gay to me." While Debbie and Damon were chatting joyfully, a young girl in light green ball gown and a pair of glass shoes appeared in their sights. Holding her hemlines in her hands, she ran happily towards them, her long black hair flying in the wind, a wide grin on her face. When she came closer, Debbie finally saw how she looked. She had beautiful blue eyes and wore sparkling red lipstick. Silently, Debbie praised, "Wow, she's a fairy." Megan came to a halt and held Damon's waist. "Uncle Damon," she called out cheerfully. In return, Damon stroked her hair. "Happy birthday, Megan," he enthused, gesture for his assistant to hand her the birthday gift. Beaming a sweet smile, Megan received the gift with appreciation. "Thanks, Uncle Damon. Happy 18th birthday, Megan. This is the gift from Curtis and me," Colleen said with a friendly smile, as she walked up to hand over her gift. "Thank you, Uncle Curtis," said Megan, her smile even wider. She stood on tiptoe and kissed him on his cheek. Then she turned to Colleen and expressed her gratefulness with a hug. Meanwhile, Debbie watched her moves in awe. Is this girl that close with Curtis? She even kissed him in front of Colleen. After greeting Wesley, Megan walked towards Carlos and clasped his palm into hers. Acting pettishly, she said, "Uncle Carlos, I absolutely love this island. Thank you for such a fabulous gift. I love you." As Debbie slowly turned to look around the island, her eyes popped wide in shock. "I guess this island at least costs hundreds of millions. Is Carlos that rich to afford a whole island as a birthday gift?" She mused. In particularly good mood, Carlos smiled to Megan and introduced Debbie to her. "Megan, I'd like you to meet Debbie Nien. You may call her Aunt Debbie. Deb, this is Megan Lawn." Pretending that she just saw Debbie, Megan exclaimed, "Uncle Carlos, since when did you have a girlfriend? You didn't even tell me." "She's not my girlfriend. She's my wife. We've already gotten married," Carlos explained. Debbie flashed a big smile and reached out her right hand. "Nice to meet you, Megan."
I'm Deb Binien.
"Happy birthday."